Do you remember Cartoon Network Adventure Time?
Well, if you're around my age, and chances are you probably do. The show first hit the airways back around 2010, growing, changing, and defying the format of children's animation in the process. Whilst over time its relevance in Western animation had declined for a while, it's arguably been given a new lease of life following the launch of its spin-off series, Fiona and Cake. Suddenly, a whole new audience is interacting with the show, and several older fans have fallen back in love with the format-defining series. So, as a new generation of the show is in full swing, with several TV shows and comic series on the horizon, and especially in celebration of the original show's 15th anniversary, I figured now would be a better time than ever to have a crack at another Iceberg chart. Though the subject has been covered by other Iceberg navigators in the past, this one in particular was created more recently by users of the icebergcharts.com websites, Pen and Hex Studios and Invincible Elliot. I've also added a few extras to keep the whole thing up to date, explore a few overlooked factoids, and I guess offer a bit more insight into the side of the fandom I'm more familiar with. So, come on, grab your friends, and let's take a trip down to the freezing depths once again as we explore the supreme Adventure Time Iceberg. The Great Mushroom War. The Great Mushroom War basically stands as the first big twist people hear about when they get into the show, revealing that the happy-go-lucky and colourful land of Vu is actually the result of a catastrophic nuclear war that took place 1,000 years before the series began. The hints of this can be sprinkled at the very start of the show's intro, showcasing several abandoned items such as TVs, a couple cassettes, and most notably, several unexploded atomic bombs strewn across a field. The show wouldn't wait too long to introduce these elements into the series proper, as the 8th episode, Business Time, would see Finn and Jake unearth a group of very smart and productive salarymen, hinting towards a more normal world existing in the before time. Fun fact, since this was the episode shown before Adventure Time's proper first episode as a sneak peek, you could say that this plot thread had been part of the show quite literally since the very beginning. This wasn't always the case though, as series creator Pendleton Ward, peace be upon him, originally intended for the show to be a straight fantasy series, but as the episode came along, helped by Ward growing up as a kid in the 80s back when post-apocalyptic fiction was all the rage, he warmed up to the concept and worked on the idea as a tribute to the stories he grew up on, rather than as a scathing commentary on the prospect of nuclear Armageddon like before. I feel like the Mushroom War was something that worked rather well for the series in the end, as it seems to be one of the few examples at the time of a show that had some dark theory explaining its backstory end up coming true, which could at least partially explain why so many young adults ended up gravitating towards the show at the start. The Snail. The Snail is this cool little guy who makes a blink and you'll miss it cameo appearance in each episode, waving towards the viewer and generally being kinda chill. He's easier to spot in some episodes than others, but you can really make a game out of trying to find him at some random points in the episode, or you could just look up his appearances on the wiki if you hate fun. There have even been several points in the series in which he served as a significant plot points, especially in the Season 2 finale-ish episodes Morsel Folly and Morsel Recoil, where his sneaking around leads to disastrous consequences, being possessed by the Lich, and forced into freeing him from his amber prison. This kicks off another stage in the series, as its first truly terrifying villain takes to the stage, all from the actions of a single tiny snail. Simon. In the two-parter Holly Jolly Secrets, in what's probably the second big twist of the series, the incompetent princess-thieving villain of the Ice King is revealed to be the shadow of a human by the name of Simon Petrikov. His descent into insanity started during his time as an antiquarian, collecting several mythical items during his expeditions, including a strange crown which fell into the possession of a Scandinavian dock worker. Whilst playing around with the crown with his at-the-time fiancée Betty Groff, Simon put the crown on, reawakening the essence it harboured, in turn terrifying Betty. As his closest companion disappears from his life, everything else crumbles around him, rapidly going grey and dropping in body temperature, all the while growing more dependent on the crown as it speaks to him, guaranteeing him his safety, allowing him to survive the Mushroom War and continue on with his empire of dirt. Or snow, I guess. To cut a long story short, the effects of the crown are reverted in the series finale Come Along With Me, and the first season of the subsequent series, Fiona and Cake, essentially focuses on him coming to terms with the person he was in the lead up to the crown's discovery, the person he spent the past 1,000 years living the life of, and the person he lost at the price of becoming himself again. Finn is colourblind. A slightly more obscure factoid about the series to most people, but one that's still worth bringing up. In the Season 5 episode Red Starved, Finn, Jake and Marceline are trapped within the ruins of the underground Sand City, and as Marceline's supplies of red objects run low, she starts to grow starved, prompting Finn to run off and find a red object before she's reduced to a more primal state. Eventually, Finn happens upon a massive ruby, taking it from a confused turtle and lugging it back to quench Marceline's thirst. However, it turns out that this ruby is actually an emerald, with Finn being unable to differentiate between the two. This implies that Finn has a case of daltonism, or red-green colourblindness, which naturally makes it difficult to distinguish between the two gemstones. Really makes you wonder how differently you might end up seeing such a colourful world. Oh, and in case you're wondering, they all turn out fine in the end, as Princess Bubblegum comes in riding on a giant sandworm to get them all out of there. Grob Gob Globgrod. This tongue twister refers to the godly collective hovering around Oo, originating as some fancy future slang used by LSP in place of God.
Tonight is the weekly prom-coming dance!
Oh, Glob.
We eventually learn that both the primarily mentioned Glob, as well as several variants of him, all actually exist as one being in the cities of Mars. Several examples of subtext indicate that they are worshipped as higher deities.
Yo, is everyone at church? Worshipping Glob?
Though, whilst their role in creating much of what appears on Oo is largely minimal, much of this mythology around them is based around their unrivaled abilities, using their omniscience to track down foes on the ground, particularly the fiendish Magic Man, with whom they turn out to have a rough history with. Such abilities give them an important role as the overhead protectors of the planet, a role they would come to fill most significantly in the Season 6 episode Astral Plane, in which they sacrifice themselves to prevent a seemingly unstoppable comet from hurtling towards Oo. Nevertheless, the quartet still live on as floating orbs, now rid of their shared body, looking down on the planet, and continuing to protect it from intergalactic threats. Bubbling. Probably one of the most significant terms to come out of the fanbase, Bubbling refers to the ship between Princess Bubblegum and Marceline. Whilst both characters originally started off as Betty and Veronica as candidates for Finn to date, some writers and fans eventually took a look at the whole thing and thought, yeah, but why don't they just date each other? And so the episode What Was Missing was created, showing the two interacting and hinting at a possible relationship once existing between the two. Considering it was 2011 when the episode came out and all the stuff happening around it was happening, such a plot element would prove to be a controversial inclusion. But the show's writers weren't looking to just throw it out, dropping several hints and signs of tension in subsequent episodes and seasons, which tons of fans continued to speculate on and hype up. This all culminated in the events of the series finale Come Along With Me, when the two finally made up, made out, and got back together. And the events in the special Obsidian and the Fiona and Cake series showed that several years later, they're still doing pretty well together. Bubbling played a major role in the show's long staying power, especially amongst the LGBT folks in the fandom, as it's probably one of the first examples of a prominent gay couple appearing in mainstream Western animation. Of course, Japan's a much different story, but we're not talking about that. As well as one of the first examples of a couple in a now much more respectful era for gay representation in popular culture. For instance, this time around, the lesbian couple's story together doesn't end in one or both of them dying. Bubbling's success in the public eye was a major sign of things to come, and a pair of lesbians in the main cast is basically a hallmark of any major cartoon today that plays host to a dedicated online fanbase, regardless of how things turn out behind the scenes. Original pilots. At the start of every TV show, there is a TV pilot, and with Adventure Time this is no exception. Following Penn Ward's graduation from CalArts, he and a few mates got together to start work on a concept, as well as a fully animated pilot that would eventually turn into the show we know today. This pilot, first premiering as a short film on Nickelodeon in January 2007, differs in a few interesting places compared to the series we know today. Whilst the much more homegrown but still very fluid art style is probably the first thing that stands out, several other quirks can be pointed out, such as Finn originally being named Pen, whilst Lady Rainicorn speaks in strange cooing sounds rather than the Korean she's known for speaking in the show, which honestly sounds even more out of left field than the typical animal noises, so I get the change. In fact, every character with the exception of Jake has a completely different voice actor. Nevertheless, the pilot would end up introducing a lot of plot elements that would later be developed upon in the series proper. They would even manage to work Abraham Lincoln on Mars into the main series. Though it released a fairly minimal fanfare on TV, online the short proved to be a massive success, carrying the right style of imagination and silly random humour that basically drove internet culture at the time, generating a lot of traction both amongst forum goers as well as fan artists, with some of this work even being featured in the show's pitch bible. It's all proved that the show had a lot of potential in its hands, prompting Frederator Studios to air it again on their Random Cartoons Incubator series, becoming one of the 3 successful pilots alongside Penn Ward's own Bravest Warriors, and Fanboy and Chum Chum, though Nickelodeon themselves would end up choosing the latter over Adventure Time. Knowing how the network historically treated shows that weren't SpongeBob, this probably turned out to be a blessing in disguise, and it could be argued that this move over to Cartoon Network was probably what allowed it to really spread its wings and become the phenomenon it's remembered for being today. Official comics. In addition to the main TV series, Adventure Time is also noted for having a long and decorated history in the field of comic books, starting in February 2012 with a mainline series written by Ryan North. The series took the cast in several new directions, including Unseen Kingdoms, and several points in the past and future. Though held a continuity largely separate from the show, it still carried the same absurd humour and exciting scale of the original series throughout its 75-issue run, but that's only one of the many comics within the universe, with an additional series, simply titled Adventure Time Comics, premiering in 2016, featuring several short self-contained and more light-hearted storylines. A bit like the Beano in that sense, or I guess Mad Magazine, maybe, if you're American? I don't really know. Beyond this, there are also several mini-series expanding on numerous characters and groups, such as Masterling Gone Adrift, Banana Guard Academy, and Fiona and Cake, creating a more unique world for the characters that started out as just being gender-flipped versions of the original cast. For instance, unlike the Ice King's more human origin, the Ice Queen started out as a water nymph corrupted by a healing gem retrieved by her cat, who creating Natasha Allegri confirmed is also supposed to be Cake. And how could we forget about the graphic novels? It was basically my mission to collect all the unique stories they offered during my time starting out as a fan, with the ones I remember best including Grable Schmables, Pixel Princesses, and obviously, if you know anything about me, Playing with Fire, which offers a surprisingly emotionally charged tale between the characters of Finn and Flame Princess at the height of their relationship, though it ends up coming off as bittersweet in hindsight, considering it was released just a couple months before Frost and Fire. Regardless, in the years following the series finale, with the exception of mini-series such as Marcy and Simon, written by Olivia Olsen herself, giving Simon a much happier ending to his story, there was a noticeable drought in new releases as the franchise entered a state of limbo. Now though, it's safe to say that, in the words of online folk, we're so back. In addition to several compendiums being released compiling Ryan North's original series, as well as the various tales in the Fiona and Cake universe, there's also a series of completely new comics being published by Ernie Press, and written by Nick Wynn and Derek Ballard, the latter of whom served as a storyboard artist for a couple of the original show's episodes. And judging by the first issue's various front covers, there's hints of several new characters being added to the roster, giving an interesting look into how this new series might go. Finn's arm foreshadowing. In the Season 6 premiere, Escape from the Citadel, Finn's long arc of suffering reaches a fever pitch, as, after being reunited and quickly betrayed by his criminal father, Finn's attempt to escape the celestial prison with him is hampered by his way out dissipating. Eventually, as he uses all the might of the grass sword to hold on to this gateway, the pressure proves to be too much, and he lets go, severing most of his right arm in the process. Whilst an emotionally resonant moment in the series thus far, this has arguably been in the cards as early as Season 2. In the episode Mortal Folly, Finn is briefly seen in a meditative state, visualising his future self as a rugged and badass hero of legend, with such a visual being punctuated by a complex robot arm, interestingly located on his right side. This design motif is copied into every other future vision of the character, including his dream adult self in Pahoy, and the elderly version of him seen still grinding through the dungeon train. Even alternate versions of him such as his farm world self and his past incarnation of Shoko share this exact trait, all distinctly missing a right arm. Considering this appears to be such a trademark of every alternative version of Finn, it ends up feeling inevitable that our version of the character will go through the same process. Finn's past lives. We briefly touched on the character of Shoko, a lone wolf vagabond who travelled the mutated lands of Vu many years before the events of the series, with her white tiger as her one constant companion. If the similarities aren't obvious enough, and you weren't paying attention to the previous entry, she turns out in the episode The Vault to be a past incarnation of Finn, whose ghostly visage gains closure after haunting the tree fort and imparting her story onto her present-day self. But she's not the only other version of Finn to have walked the Earth, as he may have also been the original reptilian Gunter, apprentice to the legendary ice elemental Urgence Evergreen, and he uses Evergreen's wish-granting crown to become his elemental idol, imprinting Evergreen's personality onto the crown, and therefore serving as a namesake for all the Ice King's penguins. In addition, he has lived the life of a butterfly, an amorphous blob, and, according to the episode The Comet, the Blue Catalyst Comet, this latter incarnation implies that Finn's spirit is a manifestation of pure good, which arrives in the physical world as a counter to the pure evil manifest in the Green Comet and the Lich. With it also being pretty obvious that Shermie serves as Finn's next or at least future incarnation, it seems like the spirit isn't looking to give up being a counterbalance to pure evil anytime soon. James Baxter! Don't worry, I won't do that again. This point can refer to two people, the dancing horse who shows up in a couple episodes to perform his ball-based acts, as well as a character animator who serves as both his namesake and a special guest animator who uses his skills to really make the character's performance pop. The buttery smooth animation of James Baxter can trace back to the real James Baxter's long history in the field, serving as the animator for several major characters, both during the Disney Renaissance and also during DreamWorks' golden age at the turn of the millennium. With his vast resume, it would be safe to say that Baxter is basically like royalty in the field of animation, sometimes seen performing guest lectures at CalArts, one of which took place while Penn Ward was still a student there. The lecture stood in his mind for many years, and a suggestion one of his classmates had for Baxter to draw a horse balancing on a bull especially stuck as being a very imaginative concept that would have looked fantastic in motion. This prompted Penn to search out for Baxter, asking him to animate for the show, and with that the episode was in full swing, with Baxter animating his namesake at his home studio using completely hand-drawn techniques from the days of old, whilst his wife helped to smoothen out the rough sketches, giving every frame a very personal touch. His work on this episode, simply titled James Baxter the Horse, would introduce a new generation of children, especially young aspiring animators, to the man behind the magic, and he will make a few appearances on other animated shows, giving a quick splash of impactful animation, demonstrating his mastery of flow, weight, and perspective, all without much of a need for computers. He still works on a few full-length films as a character animator to this day, But as the major studios have now long since pivoted to CGI, there's a bit of a worry that traditional animation on wands might end up becoming a dying art form. But with a few flashes of greatness like James Baxter's shining through, as well as several examples of online animators taking inspiration from work by people like him, we can hopefully see another age of these incredible visual techniques in a not too distant future. Guest animated episodes. James Baxter wasn't the only example of a guest animator for the series. In fact, the show has had quite a few of them, ranging from the very early seasons to even the highlights of Fiona and Cake, as each of them have a go at playing around with the show and its characters in their own unique styles. Perhaps the first example of this was Season 2's Guardians of Sunshine, which, funnily enough, was probably one of the first episodes I remember watching, checking it out on a long flight and just absolutely loving it. My love for the episode was largely down to the incredible visualization of the virtual world that Finn and Jake traverse through, using a blocky 3D style and limited frames, alongside several other quirks and motifs, to really make it feel like they are in the computer world. To make things even more impressive, this 6-minute sequence is all animated by just one guy, Jackie K. Jiang, but it wouldn't be too long until this feat was outdone, with Season 5 seeing the April Fool's Day episode A Glitch is a Glitch, which not only consisted entirely of 3D animation by experimental animator David O'Reilly, but he even served as the episode's writer, creating a very unconventional feeling experience filled to the brim with chaos, creativity, and lots of unnerving imagery, making it a really crazy episode, in a show already known for being crazy. Because of all this, I personally consider it my favourite out of the guest animated episodes, but there would also be a few more times other animators got the honour of having an Adventure Time episode all to themselves. One of these would be Masaki Yuasa, best known for creating the uniquely designed anime series Kaiba. He would see his time on the show in Season 6, with the fan favourite episode Food Chain, creating a visually flavourful experience and a well-woven narrative surrounding the circle of life. Food Chain would be followed up not long after, with the episode Water Pot Prank by David Ferguson, though unfortunately this episode wouldn't end up going down as well, and is currently regarded as the weakest in the series, technically speaking. This could be down to how it was simultaneously too different from the show, and not different enough, if that makes sense. Whilst the previous two complemented and even enhanced the show's writing and art style, Water Pot Prank's use of blocky character designs, highly detailed faces, and limited flash animation ended up running counter to the style the series was known for. In terms of writing, it also felt a bit more like an early season episode, and while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the time it came out, considering all the episodes that were coming out around it may have felt a bit too subdued and simplistic for many fans. However, perhaps in the spirit of wanting to give the talented animator a second chance, this episode has probably seen the most attention out of the library of guest animated stories, with Ferguson even coming back to animate a short exposition segment in a Distant Land special BMO, which was a much better fit for his art style if you ask me. A brief nod to the episode can also be seen during the climactic finale of Fiona and Cake's first season, as Simon trudges through various universes back to his home, including the water pot where the pranking took place, thereby meaning that this episode is canon to the overarching multiverse of the series, and if that doesn't show there aren't any hard feelings, then I don't know what does. Season 11. In my ramblings over the official comics, there's one series I left absent from the list, this being a short-lived attempt at a continuation to the series, simply titled Adventure Time Season 11. This was intended to take a Buffy the Vampire Slayer approach to continuing the show, following its conclusion on the small screen, by having a comic follow it up, exploring the loose ends left untied in Come Along With Me. These range from how Ooo might evolve in the next few centuries, to Finn having to choose between his old life on Ooo and the newly founded settlement of Humantown. Though the writers for the show itself didn't officially consider it canon to the mainline series, it did seem to have a lot of potential to it. Unfortunately, while as many as 12 issues and 4 story arcs are planned, one of which seeing Dr. Gross return to the forefront, low readership will result in the series getting axed halfway through, and fans would end up having to wait a bit for a proper continuation to the show. Nowadays, the series is largely a footnote. An interesting look at how things could have gone after the first show ended, but there are still a few copies of the comic out there in the wild. I was able to snag one myself from Titan Comics' reprint for the UK market, and though it's pretty weirdly structured, having the contents of 3 issues at once, including the last part of one arc and the whole of another, it does offer a much more comprehensive look at the kind of direction they were going for in Season 11, but my interest wouldn't be piqued quite as much as they were at the very end. At the end of issue 6, after Finn is manipulated by the people of Humantown to test his skills as a warrior, he is comforted by those around him, and they all decide to help build him his own place in between these differing worlds, where he can lay his bear-shaped hat. Then, late at night, a duplicate of his mother Minerva wanders off down to his home and lulls him to sleep with an old tune. And with all the visuals going on around them, it's so beautifully put together, and I'm not afraid to admit that I got a bit emotional around this point. The whole series could have ended here, and I probably wouldn't have minded it that much. But time marches on, and it's great to see a show continue moving in new and exciting directions once again, and this time it's actually canon. The Midnight Gospel. Following Adventure Time's conclusion, Pen Ward wasn't looking to just take a step back and live on royalties for the rest of his life. Instead, he'll quickly get to work on his next big project, this being the Netflix animated series The Midnight Gospel, created in collaboration with spiritual podcaster Duncan Trussell. Each episode took the audio from an episode of Trussell's podcast, the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, and recontextualised it into a semi-cohesive fictional narrative starring Clancy Gilroy, who travels to various universes to interview critters about philosophical topics such as life and death, reconciliation, and psychedelics, often ending with each universe being destroyed in some way. The show doesn't really have any connection to Adventure Time outside of the two sharing a creator, but the trippy visuals that it was known for are exuded throughout the series, using several creative animation techniques and an even more psychedelic art style than the one for its predecessor to discuss the subjects of each episode in creative and unconventional ways. But at the same time, it also had a lot of heart to it, making Clancy into a multifaceted character beyond being an avatar for Trussell, using the host's family history to expand on his personal life, while simultaneously illustrating Trussell's life experiences through an interesting and uniquely raw emotional lens. Nothing reflects this better than the final episode of the series, which features Clancy talking with his mother about accepting death, using audio from Trussell's interview with his own mother after she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Sadly, though Duncan Trussell and Penn Ward were both interested in continuing the show and exploring its own self-contained lore, Netflix would choose to cancel the series and focus on other animated projects, like 10 more seasons of Big Mouth. Nevertheless, it's nice to see the series end on a high note, and both its principal crew members have since moved on to greener pastures. Speaking of which, Mystery Cuddlers. And now on to Penn's most recent work, an Adult Swim pilot by the name of Mystery Cuddlers, created by both him and an Adventure Time storyboard artist Jack Pendarvis. The show features an elderly couple, one was once a dancer and the other was an auctioneer, and together they decided to spend their retirement solving crimes around town, all while putting the "or" in homicide. The puns didn't really work with my accent. It's a murder mystery, as the name and description suggest, where the two search for the person behind the murder of this arsehole who bought and trashed an art gallery, balancing the whole thing out with some light humour and close moments between the two main characters. Whilst the writing may be a bit strange here and there, often switching between vulgarity and whimsy in its style of humour, the show does carry a lot of creative set pieces and sequences set up by the two creators, and of course the relationship between the kind Arthur and the bold June is the biggest strong point in the story, which many have compared to the relationship between Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig in Adventure Time. Those cute elderly couples are just something that Penn's a big fan of. The concept is still in its early days, but with a big name behind it and a lot of potential in the many different ways the show could end up going, who knows, maybe not too long from now, we'll be seeing the Mystery Cuddlers back on the road again, continuing to bust crime in their golden years. Guns of foreshadowing. Anyway, back to Adventure Time. In the Season 6 episode Orgalog, we learn that one innocent Gunter is hiding a dark and extraterrestrial secret in that he's actually a heavily deformed version of the Orgalog, an incomprehensible alien creature driven by a lust for absolute power, an unusual and intriguing twist to be sure, but still one that has a little bit of build-up to it. This build-up comes in the form of what would otherwise be a throwaway line in the Season 2 premiere episode, It Came From the Nightosphere, which sees an interesting exchange between Hunson Abadir and Gunter. Hunson describes Gunter as being the most evil creature he's ever come across, and his attempt to harvest Gunter's soul ends up being woefully unsuccessful, and just leaves him a bit miffed. Now, of course, this whole scene was mainly played for laughs. The classic, silly little eldritch demon. He can't be that evil, he's just a penguin, look at him. You know, that kind of incongruous humour. And that's probably what they intended when they first wrote this all down. But it must have been pretty fun to dwell on the idea of, wait, what if this guy's right? An ass penguin truly is a despicable being, part of the dark triad of world-shattering, all-powerful creatures that would cause unspeakable chaos on Ooo. Martin's brain damage. From the moment he's introduced, Finn's biological father, Martin Mertens, is shown to be a deadbeat, sociopathic career criminal who's always looking to do whatever it takes to get a quick buck. However, there's also a lot to suggest that he might have not truly gone down this path until a couple blows to the head, in a Phineas Gage type scenario, albeit much less explosive. In the episode Min and Marty, as part of the Islands miniseries, we're given a brief look into the past life between Finn's parents. Whilst it shows that even back then he had a bit of a mean streak, working as a con artist with the Founders Island's criminal underbelly, two significant events appear to have sent him down an even darker path. The first came in a more minor situation, in which Martin attempts to escape from a hospital through a window, hitting his head in the process and leaving him in a full cast. But there are still some examples of humanity left within him. After all, it would have to be a pretty long con to get a woman to fall in love with you, and raise your child with her just to betray her later on. And even when he does run off on the island with his baby to save his skin, Martin does make the attempt to tell Minerva over the phone about what was going on. Unfortunately, by the time he attempts to do this, he comes across the Guardian, his biggest obstacle out of the island, and his attempts to deactivate the giant robot results in an explosion that separates both him and his child. The promo sketch by Sam Alden, one of the episode's storyboard artists, shows the aftermath of Martin's escape attempts, where he's seen bleeding profusely as pirates tend to his injury. The location of such a gash is right around his temple, in an area that seems to house the parietal and frontal lobes of the brain. the latter of which is notable for being the segment that controls decision making, and is most responsible for behavioural changes when damaged. So whilst he may appear to be an irredeemable intergalactic crime boss at this point in time, it is interesting to consider how this may have been a contributing factor to his personality in the main series.
Farmworld timeline.
In the Season 5 premiere, Finn the Human, as Finn and Jake attempt to curb the advance of the Lich and prevent his ultimate destruction of Oo, they consult the multiversal wishmaker Prismo, requesting for him to bring about a world where the Lich never existed. From here, we're given a brief look into a radically different world, simply known as the Farm World. In this setting, the Mushroom War has still happened, leaving society feeling fairly primitive, but since the actual mushroom bomb didn't explode, thanks to Simon Petrikov's sacrifice, there's no widespread mutation of wildlife or re-emergence of magic. This gives us a world that's more lived in, and Marceline, who's still alive, remains only demon and human in her DNA, causing her to age the way people normally would over 1,000 years. But it doesn't end up this way for long. Learning of the powers and wish-granting abilities of Simon's crown, this world's Finn retreated to save his family from hoodlums, and is quickly overcome by its effects on his sanity once he puts it on, succumbing to its power, detonating the mushroom bomb, and causing his pet dog to mutate into the Lich. But thankfully our Finn is pulled out of this timeline to safety. This Farmworld Finn's path of destruction eventually grows so large that Prismo and the main duo have to intervene, removing the crown and curing the Farmworlder of its effects, allowing life to return to normal and for him to move on and raise a family. Eventually though, he is forced to confront extra-dimensional elements once again in Fiona and Cake, sacrificing himself to save his son Jay and Little Destiny, daughter of his former arch-nemesis Big Destiny. The two of them go on to find solace in a new universe, developing a Romeo and Juliet kind of connection as they start a new life, continuing the legacy of the Farmworld Finn.
Philface.
This is the name given to this odd sketch of a face displaying a jolly expression with his mouth heavily agape. As its name suggests, this drawing is a self-portrait of sorts for Phil Rinder, who served as a character and prop designer in the first couple seasons, creating this little sketch as a signature of sorts whilst part of the crew. Eventually this figure would see his fair share of appearances on the show, popping up in places where you'd least expect it, a bit like the snail in that way. And also like the snail, he would also serve as a part of the show's plot in some capacity, as drawing it and dousing it in bug milk is needed to open up a portal to the Nightosphere. In addition to his face appearing on characters, props, portals to hell and others, Phil has also appeared as a full flesh and blood man, but not a human though, as Finn was still supposed to be the last one of them. He occasionally popped up in episodes as a thief in City of Thieves and as a test subject in The Suitor. Ken Ward has even claimed that there exists a Phil-faced princess, though unfortunately we have yet to be graced by the presence of a wondrous mug. Margles. As the show went on, even characters like the chaotic and whimsical Magic Man would be shown to have a dark and brooding backstory. The first indications of this came from hints in the episode Sons of Mars, when we see his ramshackle abode and discover a picture of him with a woman he was once close with. Later on in the episode, while Jake has been transformed into Magic Man to undergo his trial so the real guy can avoid it, the King of Mars, Abe Lincoln, told you he was going to pop up again, mentions that he made a turn for the worse ever since he lost a woman named Margles, someone who we also find out is a woman in Magic Man's photograph. The promo art for their episode also hints towards a tragic end for their relationship. All these clues are expanded upon 3 years and 2 seasons later in You Forgot Your Floaties, where it's revealed that whilst the two were hiking in Olympus Mons, Margles would be consumed by Golb, the Nicene embodiment of chaos. Centuries later, Magic Man would channel his mourning for her into a defense system intended to stop Golb from wreaking his destruction on Mars once again. Such a system also happened to not only be named after her, but also looked exactly like her, until her defenses activate at the peak of Olympus Mons and take their true form, using magic that was channeled deep from the nightmares of the Magic Man himself. It would take many more years to pass, and a botched science experiment before he could finally find closure in these events, simultaneously brushing off the insanity and magic held within him, leaving him as a normie, who's finally in the right headspace to return to Mars and even become its new ruler. Heyo Bimo. After testing the waters with Fiona and Cake, midway through last year the Adventure Time crew have announced that they've gone all out with 2 new series bringing the franchise back to Cartoon Network. The first of these 2 series was Heyo Bimo, developed as a collaboration between the IP's current frontman, Adam Muto, and children's author Ashlyn Anstey, who also worked as a storyboard artist on the Distant Land special Obsidian. The show is aiming for the opposite end of the demographic spectrum from Fiona and Cake, instead being aimed towards preschoolers as part of the Cartoonito block, exploring several educational subjects with Bimo and his many friendly critters, all while carrying a much cuter claymation-esque art style, honestly considering he's probably the most innocent and optimistic character out the cast. If they ever wanted to make a preschool show for the franchise, then Bimo would definitely be the best choice for their host, and I can imagine him being a nice pick to introduce kids to subjects like science and the natural world, alongside doing general fables about friendship and the like. Beyond that though, there hasn't really been much to talk about for the series in fan circles, considering there isn't really much to speculate about in a show made for infants. Side quests. Instead, while not having so much as a promo pick out yet, Adventure Time Side Quest has already attracted a fair amount of attention, aiming at itself as a middle ground between Heyo Bimo and Fiona and Cake. SideQuest plans to focus on more light-hearted and self-contained adventures for the 6 to 11 demographic, the one that the original series originally targeted. As a result, many nostalgic fans, both young and old, who enjoyed the early season adventures but didn't really care for the romance, philosophy, or deep lore, have hailed the show as a return to form for the franchise, especially since press releases stated that it intends to function as a prequel, starring Finn and Jake as kids, going out on adventures and fighting the classic Ice King, who will probably shake up a bunch of kids once they discover his backstory. Nate Cash, the supervising director for the second and third seasons, is making his comeback to the franchise to work as showrunner, and considering both of those seasons host some of the show's most iconic episodes, he definitely seems like the right man for the job. Of course, the show may not be for everyone, especially those more into the later seasons who might end up seeing it as more dumbed down, and it wouldn't be too surprising to see a few Teen Titans Go or Thundercats Raw comparisons pop up. But besides that, I could imagine the original show's high energy and action meshing well with the generation currently being raised on Skibbity Toilet. Prismo's boss. Prismo has a pretty strong role as Wishmaker and a mediator of the multiverse, but much of this work, as it turns out, is being done on behalf of someone else. The original series episode Crossover first makes mention of the character's boss, and that'll be going after Prismo if he's unable to prevent Farmworld Finn from breaking out of his homeworld and into the wider multiverse.
His boss? Who's that?
Even though he receives additional mention in Fiona and Cake, he remains unseen and unheard, with his only physical representation being through a dangling telephone, decorated with both an angelic and a demonic wing, indicating that he holds domain over both good and evil, as opposed to most other characters who tend to hold one specific alignment if that alignment's ever brought up. Obviously, since we've never seen him, there isn't really much else to say besides speculating on who exactly he could be, based on the info and details we've been given. Perhaps his boss may be God itself, and not just some variation of Glob, creator of the entire multiverse, as well as the person responsible for investing the power in people like Prismo to answer the concerns of the realm's inhabitants and create officially mandated wish worlds. Maybe the next season of Fiona and Cake might touch on that a bit more.
Before there was nothing, there were monsters.
This was part of a brief monologue delivered by the Lich to the King of Ooo in Toronto, once he's briefly reawoken in the episode Gold Stars. These monsters he speaks of are known as the primordial monsters, one of which is the Lich himself. Such a phrase implies that not only is his existence a constant in the universe, but also that his existence extends beyond time itself, a measure of his extensive power. But he's not alone. The vision imposed upon the king and his squire presents a vast cacophony of creatures, some of which go on to reflect other monster designs presented later in the series. The most identifiable of these is the visage of Orgalorg, who will play a vital role in the season 6 finale. Another lesser-known member of the group is Koken Tepe, who, after being dead for millions of years, is reawoken in the distant land special Wizard City, taking control of Peppermint Butler in a similar manner to the Lich's possession of Bubblegum in Mortal Recoil. The appearance of Koken Tepe, as well as their constant status of being either alive or carrying the possibility of coming back to life, indicates that besides these 3 known monsters, there are still potentially hundreds or even thousands still out there in some form, looking for the right opportunity to either escape containment or return to the land of the living and wreak havoc on the universe once again. Typing in the intro. After a little while of watching through the intro of Adventure Time, you may have noticed a strange tacking noise underneath Penn Ward's vocals.
Adventure time! Come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands.
This tacking noise comes from a keyboard that was being used by Derek Dryman in the background, whilst his performance was being recorded. If you're wondering why nobody told him to be quiet, well, that's because this recording was intended to be a demo for the theme music, and a more complete version of it would be worked on later. However, when they actually got around to making this complete version, Penn was unable to get the right feel for the song, and figured he did it best the first time round, so he just stuck to the original demo. And so Dryman's keyboard clicks remain immortalised as part of the show's iconic opening tune. Cosmic Owl Urinal. Another example of office life spilling into the show, the Cosmic Owl's distinct symmetrical appearance can be attributed to an unusual display located within the men's toilets of what was once Cartoon Network Studios. The image by Penn Ward displays how the reflections of 2 light sources on the flushing mechanism of the urinal results in an owl-like face popping up on top of it, staring into your soul and focusing on your innermost thoughts during a time of solitude. Obviously, since the Cartoon Network Studios are now long gone, and the original building has been refurbished and occupied by someone else at this point, it's unlikely that you can just go on a tour and find it yourself. But this reflection isn't an entirely unique phenomenon, and several Redditors have noted that they too have been paid a visit by the Cosmic Owl on the trip to the can. So next time you go off to take a piss, especially you got one of those fancy American urinals, be sure to be on the lookout for a celestial figure on the wall you usually stare blankly towards. After all, it doesn't really matter too much unless he shows up in your dream. What was Martin's cosmic crime? To go back to Martin's introduction to the series, we first see him as an inmate within the Crystal Citadel, the prison created to contain the most dangerous beings within the entire multiverse, imprisoned for committing the highest of cosmic crimes, such as decimating planet-sized populations, decimating entire planets, or just doing evil bureaucratic space stuff. This of course is a massive step up from being a local con artist selling cheap tap for a high price on some island. So how did Martin get from there to here, just 14 years and a bump on the head later? Well, from what we've been given in this episode, as well as the rest of the series, we've been shown that Martin has made a habit of connecting with some seriously seedy guys, using these skills to make his quick escape from the Citadel, with the prospect of hopefully joining forces with such despicable creatures. This type of scheming could suggest that he once lived the life of an intergalactic crime boss, whose actions had grown so extreme that only the security of the Citadel was enough to contain him. There is one other explanation that could be given as a cosmic crime that's more tangible and less based on speculation, but that's for the next entry. Mr. M is Martin. In the first Distant Land special BMO, when BMO is whisked away to a far-off planet, he eventually comes across its leader Hugo and his menacing assistants, only known as Mr. M. This Mr. M figure notably carries quite a few similarities to that of Finn's deadbeat dad, and though Adam Muto stated in an AMA that the suggestion sounded like an unsubstantiated rumour, there is actually quite a bit of substance to the rumour. For one, they both carry the same voice actor and vocal characteristics as one another, largely the same proportions, and have a knack for conning people out of their property and resources, in this case extending such an action to a planetary scale. It even brings up some points about how kids always call out their deadbeat parents. That last detail may seem quite weird, seeing how escape from the Citadel obviously hasn't happened yet, and the last time Martin saw his son was when he couldn't talk, but I guess we could just chalk this up to a classic case of Freudian projection. The fact that he nonchalantly flies off once things go south for the people on the ground could suggest that his method has morphed into an effective MO by this point, implying several other planets have faced his manipulative attacks on their homes and livelihoods, all racking up into one massive cosmic crime. But if all this information doesn't leave you convinced, then it's basically confirmed in a storyboard for an episode of Fiona and Cake, where Martin's mugshot is shown alongside a profile of Mr. M, essentially verifying his status as an alias for Martin. Still, the writers figured that the subtext in BMO was enough, and just replaced him with a side view of the main Martin in the final episode. Astro BMO. Whilst we're on the subject of BMO, there's an interesting addition to the special feature during the credits, since the episode starred BMO going on an adventure in space. The episode will end with footage of a real BMO in real space. This is what's known among the crew and fans as Astro BMO, an animatronic that was invited to the International Space Station in 2019 as part of a project by the Quest Institute. The device makes use of a so-called laser defense system, as it uses two small lasers to detect a few small and fairly harmless floating objects, and reacts accordingly by punting them out of the way with its mobile little arms. Adam Muto said that the existence of Astro BMO turned out to be a lucky coincidence once it came to writing out the BMO special, rather than a pricey publicity stunt, so the crew decided to throw in some footage of the little guy in action to end off the episode. There's plenty of footage online of Astro BMO doing his thing, both on the Adventure Time subreddit, as well as the official YouTube channel for its creator, Orbian, demonstrating the device's various quirks, including a few small voice lines, delivered by Nikki Yang herself.
Greetings from the International Space Station.
Finn enjoys a taste of human meat. The rather twisted quirk of Finn noted on previous Iceberg charts can be found in the episode Her Parents, in which Jake prepares a dinner for Lady Rainicorn, who's looking to introduce Jake to her parents. Shocking, I know. The twist, however, comes in for their unusual dietary requirements, as the primary form of meat used to feed the Rainicorn species in previous centuries was that of humans. Hilarity ensues once Finn rolls up with the dishes, but Lady's parents are more interested in eating him. Thankfully though, after settling things with the Rainicorn family, they decide to sit together and have a much less violent alternative: soy humans. Created after the Rainicorns believe that they hunted humankind to extinction, out of common courtesy, Finn ends up having to join in with the feast, though funnily enough, as Finn takes a bite and the audio of the episode morphs into a loud and creepypasta-esque buzz. You can see that Finn is actually quite fond of the taste, before the episode abruptly ends. People have previously explained that this may be because, according to experts, cannibals by any other name, human meat actually shares a rather similar taste to pork, so really there wasn't much of a difference in taste to this human meat, and a nice slice of bacon, or at least bacon-flavoured rubber, since these are soy humans we're talking about. But beyond all the semantics, to quote Book of Alice, I guess we can all agree at the end of the day, bacon do be good though. Dream theory. A staple of any popular kids show fandom, something that I even brought up in the other Iceberg video I made, is the idea that everything is all in the head. Someone, usually one of the main characters, came up with the events of the show, either as a result of being in a coma, or as a way to cope with traumatic events in the real world, and at one point, Adventure Time was among the many to follow this rule. This dramatic image, featuring a comatose Finn, was widely circulated in the show's early days, featuring a more dog-like Jake and a more heart monitor-like BMO surrounding him, both of whom would morph into elements of a psychedelic dream world, like life on Mars, but for kids. A couple of variations include the idea that Finn is either a destitute child wandering through the aftermath of the Mushroom War, or some other unspecified war, dreaming things up to cope with the horrors and bloodshed as bad thoughts nevertheless continue to creep in. Another theory marries these two together by having him fade in and out of consciousness, as scientists use scents such as candy, blood, burnt wood and pet hair to keep his brain stimulated. Then there's also the idea that the show is the product of bedtime stories told by Simon to Marceline in the aftermath of the war. A lot of these, whilst maybe a bit fun to consider, are pretty cliche to say the least. And as the real existential horror started to seep into the show, the need to add a dark twist to the storyline basically became pointless. It's all like how a fandom tends to go towards dark places if the source material is light and happy, whilst fans go in the opposite direction for darker productions. The tonal shift as significant as Adventure Time is probably muddies the water a bit. The crew may have also drawn attention to these theories themselves, if this line by Jake is anything to go by.
What if the whole world was just some goof's dream? Man, that would be stupid.
So, yeah, it wasn't all a dream, and saying it was just makes it sound stupid.
Ice King has an eating disorder. Now going from stupid to incredibly dark, let's talk about eating disorders. The Ice King is no stranger to the idea of hosting a tragic side to his character, but beyond the whole being a normal human guy under the control of a maddening crown thing, the guy himself has also demonstrated a few concerning habits, one of which concerns his inconsistent diet, as it's suggested by Penn Ward during a DVD commentary, that whilst he often focuses on exercise and dieting in order to impress princesses, he often binge eats whenever he's depressed, gaining all that weight he attempted to shed off. Though whenever we see him without his ill-fitting gown, he isn't always shown as being obese or even when he's muscular on a good day, but instead there are several times where he's also shown as being extremely skinny, to the point of appearing dishevelled, and there have also been occasions where he appears to have gone long periods without eating, till his body is essentially begging him to get another mouthful.
Oh, fine.
Such a heavy fluctuation in weight is often regarded as a sign of several eating disorders, and more broadly severe depression, leaving him often struggling to feel comfortable in his own body, perhaps even reflecting the repressed state of mind held by Simon, all adding to the tragedy of his character.
Bubblegum's German. There are several points throughout the series in which Princess Bubblegum breaks out into short bouts of speaking German, especially when she's surprised or under stress.
Ich bin so glücklich. Ich könnte.
But unlike the constant Korean performed by Lady Rainicorn, these only pop up on relatively rare occasions, speaking in perfect English every other time. There isn't really much that can explain this inexplicable code switching, outside of sounding kinda cool and quirky, like when the Japanese version of Sonic suddenly yells out a phrase in English.
Hey guy! Hey cat!
Some have theorised that it may be because she came across some German language books when she got out into Mother Gum, or that maybe the Mother Gum itself is somewhere in Germany, or at least in what used to be Germany. But there has been an interesting passage in the Adventure Time Encyclopedia, written in universe by Hunson Abadir, in which he claims German as the preferred language of demons, and considering her associations with someone like Peppermint Butler, who has long held skills in the dark arts, it all seems to point towards a darker side to her character. When you combine this with her more dictatorial attributes, as well as the fact that the language is what it is, then maybe her detractors might be getting somewhere when they call her Pink Hitler. Really though, it could just be because Hinden Walsh was learning German at the time and just wanted to flex her multilingual skills. It's kind of why in the German dub, PB switches to Turkish instead. As her voice actress in that version is of Turkish descent. That big ass hole in the earth. So whenever you see the land of Vu from above, there's always this weird gap in the entire quarter of the earth, a massive pit showing how royally screwed this planet had gotten in the past. There have been a few moments throughout the franchise that address the giant hole-shaped elephants in the room, with the comic's first story arc even ending with it being filled in with an extreme amount of sand, hidden within a bag of holding. But how exactly it got there is still a mystery. The most obvious explanation is that the mushroom bomb did it, creating a massive crater in the earth and leaving tons of deadly fallout for everywhere it didn't get. But when we see the weapon in action in Finn the Human and Jake the Dog, it doesn't really let out that much of a shockwave, let alone a fireball. Much of it was just a cloud of green terror that went out to mutate everything. Instead, this two-parter points towards another explanation for this geological discrepancy, as a flashback by the Farnwell's Marceline also shows that a comet flew past but didn't strike the Earth, shortly after Simon stopped the mushroom bomb, suggesting that it may be responsible for the creation of the crater, and some shift in orbit in the split timeline prevented it from directly colliding with the farm world. Sketches featured in both I Remember You and Betty also show an intact Earth next to a meteorite hurtling towards it. The scenario may also relate to the abnormal readings in the atmosphere, hinted at by Two Bread Tom during a flashback in the Stakes episode Everything Stays, requiring the humans to escape immediately, possibly to somewhere out of the blast zone if his theory is anything to go by. After this point though, hints start to emerge once again that suggest humanity is responsible for the crater, as the episode Hide and Seek, part of the later Islands miniseries, features the planet and its distinct carved out piece during the reciting of the Founders song, specifically around the part that featured the lyrics,
"We made a lot of errors."
The flashback sequence in BMO also shows several nuclear bombs going off and a large flash appearing on Earth during the Mushroom War, wiping out everything within its radius.
Though no comet appears to be in sight.
So it could very well be that another superweapon besides the mushroom bomb was responsible for both the unusual atmospheric readings and the subsequent horrific explosion, marking 2 times in which humanity destroyed the planet. But either way, since it's never really been confirmed one way or the other, the crater's existence could either be caused by an active glob, or it could just be a monument to mankind's hubris. Guess it depends on how misanthropic you're feeling. Naked woman in the treehouse. Just atop the dining table in Finn and Jake's treehouse is what can best be described as a tasteful nude hanging on the wall, possessing just enough wear and tear to conveniently leave out the erogenous zones. Originally, some members of the crew, including character designer Natasha Allegri, insisted that the painting wasn't a nude, and that the model was actually just wearing a strapless bikini instead. But in the episode Come Along With Me, we're very briefly shown the missing piece of the puzzle, showing that it was indeed what it looked like. Guess it was only flashed up at some points in the last episode, and everything that's particularly immodest is covered up anyway, so I guess the artists figured they could finally get away with showing it. Secret screen. In the 3DS version of the show's first game, Hey Ice King, Why Do You Steal Our Garbage? You're gonna hear a lot of mouthfuls with those game names. A small snippet is hidden within the title screen that can be found by inputting a detailed but iconic cheat code. If you select the buttons up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, then you're greeted with a performance by a pixelated Penn Ward, positioned between an even more pixelated Finn and Jake, as he sings and dances to the secret screen song.
Secret screen. This is the secret screen. Ba-da-da-da-da-da, secret screen. Secret screen.
For those less in the know about gaming culture, this specific sequence of inputs is what's known as the Konami code, so named as it was created by game publisher Konami, and most famously used during the NES era of gaming, granting curious players incredible rewards for their knowledge, such as 30 lives in Contra and a full set of weapons in Gradius. The code has gone down as one of the most iconic examples of a cheat code or Easter egg in video gaming, and has been referenced countless times both in games by other developers, and even in other media. And when you combine this with much of the crew growing up around the time the NES was the big thing for children across America, it would only make sense to pay homage to the classic code once Adventure Time got a game of its own. Mathematical. Mathematical was a YouTube web series centered around Adventure Time, created by one of its production companies, Frederator Studios. The channel began around the start of Season 3, recapping the events of recent episodes, adding in a few storyboard segments and some tidbits from behind the scenes, all within a space of a couple minutes. It may have not been the most comprehensive look behind the curtains, but there seems to be a lot of passion into making it a proper supplementary series for the online audience, like Doctor Who Confidential if it was structured like a vlog. This all changed of course just 10 episodes in, when it came time to recap the episode What Was Missing. While Rebecca Sugar and the rest of the crew knew they had to tread carefully around PB and Marceline's subtext, lest they faced the watchful eyes of standards and practices, Mathematical enjoyed far less restrictions on YouTube, aimed itself at a vaguely older audience, wanted to engage with what the fans were into, and was created without the original team's involvement. Therefore, there wasn't really anything holding them back, and so they just outright said, looks pretty gay. You think that sounds cool? Let us know in the comments. But this was 2011, and all the stuff happening around it was indeed still happening, so naturally the video would get into a bit of hot water. As a result, Frederator would do a complete 180, deleting the video, cancelling the series, firing its producer Dan Rickmers, and issuing an apology from Fred Sybert himself, who said that the team just got a bit too carried away with spicy fan arts. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew had to deny that this was their intention with the episode, in order to get pearl clutches off their back. Needless to say, things have come a long way since then. The web series appears to have been largely forgotten outside of what was retroactively seen as the first official endorsement of Bubbling, but a lot of the videos, including the most infamous one, have actually now been re-uploaded. Most of these now available under the same channel that hosted them all those years ago, and you can see in many of these videos that the whole Bubbling thing wasn't a standout event, as the efforts of passionate fans are put on full display throughout the series' short run. Double Rainbow. Amongst the show's early examples of promotional material was a short animation parodying what was, at the time, a very popular internet meme. The short clip starred Jake recording 2 Lady Rainicorns, gazing in awe at the splendour of the phenomenon, a close replication of the then recent viral recording of a double rainbow by the late Paul Vasquez, also known as Bear. Penn Ward had actually brought the video up on his Twitter a couple months earlier, and he said he enjoyed it quite a bit, so it's likely he might have actually had a hand in creating this promo as a playful spoof on the video.
Neddy is autistic. In the Season 7 premiere, Bonnie and Neddy, we learn a lot more about the origin of PB, particularly the fact that when she was birthed from a mother gum, she emerged with someone else, her brother Neddy, who from the start was cut a much rougher deal in life. After falling on his back from a mother gum and onto a sharp stalagmite, he quickly gets startled and runs off into the outside world, getting even more overwhelmed by everything happening around him. This is until he discovers his happy place, the roots of a tree that he joyously suckles from, releasing juices from his paws that years later are now used to power the Candy Kingdom as he keeps to himself deep underground. Throughout the episode, Neddy's activities and mannerisms appear to mimic those of a more lower functioning autistic person, being non-verbal, only really communicating when he's startled or overwhelmed, and holding a fixation on sensory stimuli, as seen by focusing his touch on the roots of the tree that he also spends all his time tasting. He even makes a stimming motion with his hands once he's reunited with his beloved tree at the end of the episode. When you combine this with PB's monologue, it's pretty obvious that the writers are trying to marry the events of the episode with the experiences of growing up with an autistic sibling. LEGO Dimensions. In the midst of the all-encompassing toys-to-life craze in gaming, brought about through the success of Skylanders, one example of the genre that would probably make the most sense would be that of LEGO Dimensions. This one added an extra layer to the concept, as in addition to being based on an actual toy brand, each of the figurines could be put together in classic LEGO fashion, and the brand's history of licensed products basically meant that the options for characters were practically endless. It was basically like a bunch of Traveller's Tales LEGO games all in one package. Well, not really, you still had to buy each pack separately, but you know what I mean. Many mainstays of the brand were offered for the game, such as DC, Harry Potter, and of course Ninjago, but the vast majority of options were for IPs that previously didn't have much representation in LEGO form, including Sonic the Hedgehog, Portal, Scooby-Doo, Gremlins, The Goonies, and Beetlejuice. Come to think of it, there were a lot of Warner Brothers IPs, probably because they publish a game and all, but they do have a habit of nostalgia baiting. Anyway, what we're here for is the Adventure Time stuff, which span 3 different packs, one containing both Finn and the adventure world where much of the content can be found, and another 2 featuring additional playable characters, these being Jake, LSP and Marceline. The gameplay primarily focused around a mission titled A Book and a Bad Guy, combining the events of the Ankai-Ridian and Mortal Folly, where you get the Ankai-Ridian and then move on to defeat the Lich. It was also one of the many packs that even came with completely original voice lines for the characters, including most of the NPCs inhabiting the main adventure world, of which there are tons, ranging from PB to the Ice King, Flame Princess, the Elves of Lemongrab, there were 2 by this point, Tree Trunks, and even Simon and the young Marceline, scavenging through the aftermath of the Mushroom War. The level also made use of cel shading to better match the art style of the show, and to top it all off, came with a vast number of mini-games through which to collect all 28 of the golden bricks it had on offer, including the iconic Party in the Clouds. So if you've ever wanted to see Harry Potter boogie down to Jake's Bug Dance song, well, now you can. As for anything extra, a battle arena would also be included, modelled around a pillow world that Finn would live a lifetime through in Bahoy, and there's even another battle arena that can be found as a secret area, except this one isn't just in the Adventure Time pack, but also the Sonic themed one as well. Why it's there I have no idea, but sounds cool I guess. The sheer amount of content and references to the show's first 5 or so seasons is really something to behold, and the translation into the LEGO design style was executed surprisingly well, especially for a franchise that didn't really have much of a history of LEGO to begin with. Diamonds and Lemons. Adventure Time and Minecraft are 2 properties that would probably also go together rather well. One's about a boy and his dog traversing mythical lands and fighting bad guys, and another's about a lone guy, sometimes with a dog, travelling across several wide-ranging biomes and fending off against several types of monsters. When you look at it like that, it makes sense that the series would end up being the basis for one of the many official skin packs and downloadable worlds to the game. In fact, the relationship between the 2 franchises had grown so close that the opposite and far less conventional thing happened. The Adventure Time crew decided to make a crossover episode with Minecraft. Several artists had a go at translating the show's art style into the block-based world. Matt Cummings chose a more conventional 2D look with some details that reflected the set pieces of the game. Alex Senwell tried a 3D approach consisting of both cube-based structures and more dynamic character designs, and eventually Joe Sparrow's meet in the middle design won out. And looking at this range of different art styles being proposed, combined with the fact that work on this episode, less prioritised by the team compared to the main plot, took place late into the main series production, perhaps it might not be too surprising as it ended up being the show's penultimate overall episode, sandwiched in between the build-up to the finale and the finale itself. But due to not being canon to the main events, it wasn't designated as part of being the 10th season, or any season for that matter, just a one-off special celebrating another pop culture cornerstone of the 2010s. Despite all that, the episode is actually pretty good for what it is, basically being a more chilled out tale with a bunch of small subplots or sketches loosely tied together, like 22 short stories about Springfield, all rounded up with a message on focusing on the process of creating rather than just a finished product, the journey rather than the destination if you will. Sadly though, since the episode came out right in the middle of the show's final story arc, it ended up being overlooked as an odyssey, especially since it came out a couple years after the Minecraft hype had died out. But in retrospect, you could also say the episode might have come out a bit too early, as just a year later the game would see a massive resurgence in popularity, driven by nostalgia for the classic editions, as well as YouTubers taking the game in interesting new directions. So Cartoon Network could have just sat on the idea for another year, never mind the show's ending, and it might have gone down even better. By the way, I just want to draw attention to the amazing opening sequence for the special. Created entirely using incredibly smooth, energetic and colourful pixel arts. Honestly, if they ever try to do some special guest animated episode again, they should really go for something like that. After all, they managed to get this much material for one game. Imagine how much they would get with a bunch of other ones. Possible movie? The idea of an Adventure Time film adaptation has been floated around for a bit over a decade at this point. The earliest attempt at making something movie-like was being done during the production of Season 5, instead opting for a more hour-long TV movie approach to wrap up the events of the season. Early storyboard drafts of the film were found about 10 years later, just lying about on Jesse Moynihan's website, alongside a description that, in true Jesse Moynihan fashion,
states how the film focused on Finn experiencing an existential crisis,
concerning the difficulties of doing good without any reward, his own mortality, and his place in the universe. These plans didn't get too far into development, as it was all being written at the same time other writers were doing the rest of the season, but much of their elements would be repurposed into later episodes, most notably in a Distant Land special, Together Again. Then, midway through Season 6, plans were brewing to take the whole film idea another stage up, and into a full theatrical production. Unfortunately, even less is known about this version of the film, as only a press release announcing that it was probably happening was ever released to the public, before becoming whatever you call movie vaporware. All we really know is that, in addition to Penn Ward having a hand in its development, Chris Mackay and Roy Lee, who had previously worked on the Lego Movie, were amongst the film's producers before production teetered off. Then, 3 years later, as the show itself was coming to an end, showrunner Adam Muto came up and just said the film was never officially announced, to highlight how little was actually developed, and also brought up that the show wouldn't see a film as a follow-up to the finale, or probably any film at all, as there was too much lore in a show by this point to really make such a pricey production accessible for an everyday audience. This attitude seems to change though in 2024, as in between announcing the spin-offs Heyo Bimo and Side Quests, Warner Bros. Animation announced that another attempt was being made at a new film, and this time there are quite a few series regulars helming the project. Rebecca Sugar was coming back to the show after setting the world on fire with Steven Universe, in more ways than one. Patrick McHale was also returning after creating Over the Garden Wall, often regarded as the greatest animated series of the 2010s, and even Adam Muto seems to have changed his mind on the whole idea. Really, it's anyone's guess as to what they could do with an Adventure Time film by this stage in the franchise's history. The stakes have already been raised to world or universe-ending scenarios on several occasions, and a lot of fans see Together Again as the proper end for Finn and Jake's story, so it would be interesting to consider where they would go next. When would it be set? What characters would it involve? Would Finn and Jake even be there? Of course, since the film is still far earlier in development than both other productions so far, with its Variety article indicating that it might not have even been greenlit yet, this could just eventually turn into yet another case of whatever you call movie vaporware. But then again, knowing this time around that the production is in the safe hands of talented people with a strong history in the show, maybe things might go differently this time around. Orgalog and Hunson in Monster Soup. Going back to the episode Gold Stars, where the Lich delivers a haunting speech explaining the origins of both him and the rest of his kin, the primordial monsters, we are presented what could be described as a primordial soup of these ancient creatures. Among these, of course, is the Orgalog, in what was his first appearance before he was properly introduced later in the season. But amongst these other incomprehensible beings, some have pointed out that one of these bears a mild resemblance to the monstrous form of Marceline's demonic father, Hunson Abadir. Whilst I personally can't see much of a similarity, there are a few elements to his character that indicate that he may be, like the Orgalog, an example of a primordial monster living amongst mere mortals. For instance, Marceline describes her father as being immortal, so immortal in fact that he's specifically described as being deathless, as in he cannot die, allowing him to serve as the eternal ruler of the nightmarish realm, the Nightosphere. This is a trait that is only shared by the Primordials, and like the Primordials, there are indications that he may have lived an impossibly long life, as in the Adventure Time Encyclopedia, again, written by Hunson himself. He states that he cannot remember how long he lived, perhaps believing he may be older than time itself. This would mean that he would have to be amongst the Primordials, as before there was time, there was nothing, and before there was nothing, there were monsters. As in, the primordial monsters. You see where I'm getting at here? But the Adventure Time Encyclopedia, like most non-animated content in the franchise, is often regarded as non-canon, especially since it contradicts much of what happens in the show itself. The clearest example of this can be found in the episode Daddy's Little Monster, where he explains that whilst his daughter is being corrupted by the Nightosphere amulet, he says that was how he got his chaotic evil energy too, stating that the process she was going through was how he grew up. This indicates that not only is his monstrous form not entirely his own creation, but also that he had a childhood, which doesn't exactly make sense for someone that existed outside of time itself. When you combine this with the, in my opinion, tenuous link between Hudson and this primordial creature, chances are Hudson may not have been one of them. Lich Hand in every universe. In the episode Crossover, Finn and Jake work together to get the farm world Finn away from the strength of the crown, in order to prevent him from breaking out and wreaking havoc across several different universes. Whilst they are successful in this regard, the progress made by the crown-possessed counterpart results in something, or someone, or multiple people technically, slipping through the cracks. Thanks to the help of this universe's Lich, who has possessed the farmworld's Jake, Big Destiny has done the bidding of his old punching bag, and has retrieved all the stones for the Enchiridion, thus granting this Finn the ability to open up a portal not just to any one universe, but the entire multiverse at once. Meanwhile, our Jake has been captured by his Lich-possessed self, but is freed from his grip moments before death, thanks to the grass sword outstretching from our Finn's right hand, severing the hand holding a normal Jake. But when he lands next to the portal, and a Lich hand lands on him shortly after, he pushes it out of the way and into the portal. From this Rube Goldberg chain of events, the Lich hand ends up splitting out into an infinite amount, one for each universe in the ever-expanding cosmos. The one in our Prime timeline is stamped out fairly quickly, being crushed by the Lich's current incarnation as Sweet Pea in the episode Whispers, but snuffing out one of an infinite number of flames isn't exactly going to put out a fire, and the return of the Lich in a distant land special together again indicates that he remains a formidable threat, even in the most hard-to-reach of realms. Plus, in the Fiona and Cake episode Prismo the Wishmaster, there was a version of the Lich seen lurking in the background of the world wished into existence by Wyatt, you know, who's resident beta bitch boy, implying that with every new universe added to Prismo's roster, there will always be another incarnation of a Lich causing terror across the vast stretches of reality. How long do Rainicorns live? In the episode Jake the Dad, Jake and Lady Rainicorn take their relationship to tier 15, as Lady gives birth to quintuplets, Charlie, Kim Kill-1, Jake Jr., TV, and Viola. Jake having all this responsibility suddenly thrust upon him would surely result in a long and... oh wait, turns out just after a few days they've grown to maturity and Jake can now go back to living an independent life. But don't worry, I'll still visit from time to time. Whilst it does help wrap up this important development in a single 11-minute episode, it does raise questions on how quickly Rainicorns age. Jake is already shown to have aged at a different pace than Finn, with the series starting out showing Finn as 12 whilst Jake is 28 in magical dog years. But later on they're shown to have been babies around the same time, and in BMO, when Finn is probably around 5 or 6, Jake appears to be in his rebellious teenager phase. But when we examine the rapid growth of Jake's kids, it's pretty clear there's a massive spike up in how quickly they grow and develop, and these are only half Rainicorns. This is the average between the two. For all we know, full-bred Rainicorns age like giraffes, living independently after a few minutes of fumbling around. But in spite of this rapid maturity, Rainicorns still seem to go on for a pretty long time, enjoying a human lifespan, or perhaps one that's far longer, as the episode Time Sandwich sees Jake wishing for Mr. Cupcake to look after Lady and the kids after he dies, so she's at least likely to outlive a magical dog. In addition, throughout the entire length of the show, Lady shows no significant signs of aging, not even a wrinkle, unlike her daughter Charlie. In the end, it seems like the main thing that brings up this confusion is that Rainicorns only rapidly mature, and then just seem to age at a relatively normal pace. And that can also be seen by the changes in generations, reducing the pace of this maturity somewhat. For instance, Jake and Lady's half Rainicorn children rapidly spike up to around their mid-20s and 30s, and then continue on normally, whilst their quarter Rainicorn granddaughter Bronwyn is shown to comfortably be in her teenage years in wheels, and hasn't changed that much by the time she's adventuring with a now bearded Finn in Obsidian. It might be difficult to properly pin down how long these long-bodied, colourful creatures are in for the ride, but what's definitely true is that there's bound to be quite a few people jealous of them keeping their looks. Knife Rain. Why the fuck? In the episode Rainy Day Daydream, Finn and Jake are stuck inside as a particularly violent storm rages on outside. Now, even a fierce rainstorm doesn't feel like the kind of thing that would keep the most fearless of adventurers at bay, but they might be acting a bit differently if those raindrops were, say, replaced with sharp daggers. Nice storms like this one are a pretty rare event in the Land of Ooh,
as Finn is initially shown as being amazed by the spectacle before he's pulled in by Jake.
But even then, they aren't shown to just be a once-in-a-generation disaster, as their appearance in Pahoy show that they're just something that people in Ooh just have to contend with, like tornadoes and hurricanes. But as the entry's name suggests, we never exactly find out why this phenomenon takes place. Whilst LSP's blaspheming, the stupidity of the Candy citizens, and even the Ice King singing Marceline's Fry song are given serious explanations behind them later on in the show, the ingredients behind Knife Rain have never really been explained. This has led for people to start speculating, some suggesting that this massive knives falling from the sky may have been the result of some disturbance in the balance of the multiverse, caused by universes colliding and creating wormholes, bending the fabric of reality. This is why both instances of Night Rain occur in episodes where reality is substantially altered, with Rainy Day Daydream seeing Finn and Jake affecting their treehouse with their extremely vivid imaginations, and Pahoy seeing Finn travelling to the pocket dimension of the Pillow World. Of course, though, there's the more obvious explanation. The knives just evaporated and condensed in the clouds. Cinnamon Bun was half-baked. Though the Candy citizens aren't exactly known for being the most switched-on people in Ooh, Cinnamon Bun from his first appearance is very clearly shown to not be the sharpest candy corn in the pack. He's simple-minded, short-tempered, and indecisive, and his unflattering appearance, I suppose, complements these traits. Initially, some have suggested that his unique ditziness could be the result of a strong concussion, brought about by him accidentally hitting his head on one of PB's towers during his first appearance in the Enchiridion. Such an event would surely have a profound effect on him that he may never recover from. Except he did. In the episode The Red Throne...
Oh, what? I'll help you. I'll do anything for you.
After he ran off to help Flame Princess overthrow her father, he's splashed by a wave of fire from one of the Flame King's loyalists. After this flash subsides, he's suddenly a completely different man. His eyes are now full black beads rather than small sunken dots, and his face is now buttery smooth, and to top it all off, he's able to perform a massive speech in support of FP, from that day onwards serving as our most loyal squire. This event turning CB into a proper stand-up guy and gaining a much more refined appearance indicate that he was meant to appear like this all along. The only issue was that, as PB put it in the earlier episode The Other Tarts, he was quite literally half-baked. It would only take spending his days in a massive oven to really help that brain of his heat up. Still, there are a few points after this event where he shows a few more signs of being a bit dopey, though I guess a centuries-long diet of dum-dum juice probably does that to a candy mofo. kingofoo.tumblr.com. This domain name refers to the official production blog that's been maintained by the team on Adventure Time and all of its successive shows since 2013, around the time its namesake was introduced in the episode Apple Wedding, as an egotistical royal larper who also ran his own websites. Unlike the King site, probably created to fuel an ego, the Tumblr blog was created to essentially fill the gap left by the cancellation of Mathematical, offering a deep and intimate look into the production process,
featuring sketches of both previous and upcoming episodes,
links to entire storyboards for episodes as recent as Jelly Beans Have Power in Season 8, as well as miscellaneous bits of artwork created by members of the team, either to promote new episodes or just for the fun of it. As implied earlier on, the blog is still regularly updated today, and much of our information on new releases comes from here. Normally it does at least. That new season of Fiona and Cake is still very much under wraps. Rumblejaw. Around July of 2019, people started taking notice of a few curious credits appearing on LinkedIn pages and the like, surrounding a TV or streaming special known as Rumblejaw.
The idea caught the attention of quite a few fans of Adventure Time due to the leader of the animation guild, Steve Hewlett, stating he was told it was based on the characters in Adventure Time.
A few examples of concept art would also lead people to suggest that it may have functioned as a spiritual successor of sorts to the show, the ukulele to Adventure Time's Banjo-Kazooie, if you will. However, it was clear from the get-go that this was just a code name or working title for another upcoming project, like how Return of the Jedi once went by the name Blue Harvest, or how the new series of Doctor Who was once being produced under the name of Torchwood, before that also became a thing. It seems that we didn't even get any of this anime-esque concept art until after it was revealed that Distant Lands was a project that was actually being worked on, and all pretenses of it being a different IP were dropped. You could still tell though that the artists had a lot of fun coming up with the idea for what this show could have been based on the title. Maybe they could have like a crack at this at some point in the future? I don't really know. Nevertheless, they would still pay tribute to the idea by including the two main characters of Rumblejaw on a TV screen during the Distant Land special BMO. Steve Wolfhard's post-finale headcanons. Amongst a vast sum of official fan work, quite a few sketches created by storyboard artist Steve Wolfhard have captured a lot of fans' attention by offering such a vivid and imaginative look into the far future world we get brief glimpses of in the episodes Greybills 1000+, and of course Come Along With Me. In addition to the duo of Shermie and Beth, who, whilst first appearing in a lesser episode, were first sketched out during the production of the former, there are numerous unusual folks dotted around this world, either just shown for a couple seconds in the intro to Come Along With Me, or simply just never seen in an animated form. These included new fire and slime elementals. We don't see a different candy elemental though, as PB is still alive. A descendant of Lumpy Space Princess, complete with a spin on one of her more outlandish quotes. This possum named Clover, who looks a bit like a clanger, as well as a vast number of descendants of the Pup Quintuplets. Each are born with their own unique powers, though most end up having them removed shortly after they're born. A couple of exceptions to this though include Herm, with the ability to split in two, Jess, with the ability to write using holograms, though it's maybe more of a cybernetic implant than a natural power, and Raisin, with the power of, in Wolfhard's words, holy shit. But amongst the most formidable of these is Gibbon, the child of Charlie, Wolfhard's personal favourite of the pups, who has gained the powers of immortality, the ability to shoot pink ice, and most notably, the ability to extinguish other pups' powers, and his status as an elder, authoritative, and perhaps authoritarian figure, explains why many pups after a certain number are shown to have their powers suppressed. But perhaps the best known addition to the lore came from something that happened much earlier on, these being the circumstances surrounding Jake's death. This event has been drawn out in the form of a brief comic, in which, whilst several characters mourn the loss of the famed stretchy dog, like a lot of the dead, his body ends up giving way. This isn't as gross as it usually would be, rather his stretching powers suddenly go off, causing him to expand at a rapid pace. Eventually, the only thing left to do is to grab hold of his colossal cadaver, and place it deep within the massive hole in the earth, growing to the point where he fills it all up at long last, transforming it into a gargantuan fertile landmass that will serve as a beautiful home for those across the Earth for millions of years to come. With all these imaginative concepts, it seems like if there was ever going to be a proper continuation to the series, then Steve definitely seems like the man for the job. Mona Lisa. Whilst I'm on the subject of Steve Wolfhard's sketches, this other one doesn't really count as a post-finale headcanon, as it was proposed long before the series ended. But whenever those things are discussed, they often get paired with this picture Wolfhard shared in 2017. This links to a proposal he put forward suggesting that, instead of Flame Princess or Huntress Wizard, Finn would get with Mona Lisa, as in the Da Vinci painting, who was granted life as a result of mutations in the Mushroom War, and now serves as the princess of a kingdom described as a shrunk-down version of Florence. Though of course nothing relating to this proposal would be put forward in the show, the idea caught the attention of certain fans, especially those on 4chan's Coboard, who would post some fan art here and there depicting the relationship dynamic between Finn and his short-stack Italian GF. Unfortunately, much of this hype was built around just one guy, nicknamed Mona Anon, posting about it in each Adventure Time thread, and though a lot of Anons warmed up to him, a few others ended up finding him annoying, giving him a 1-year ban for spamming, and much of the fan art went away with him. So, yeah, alright, the Jannies can just ban a guy for being mildly annoying, but I guess all those rage baiters and Barney friends are just part of healthy discussion. Yeah, got ya. Cut Finterest scene at the end of Fiona and Cake. Following the premiere of Come Along With Me, there were still quite a few loose ends that had yet to be properly tied up, and while most of these were addressed in Distant Lands and especially Fiona and Cake, one plot point conspicuously left open-ended surrounded the conclusion of Finn's love life. There were several points in the later seasons which may have indicated that he would either rekindle his relationship with Flame Princess, or perhaps pursue the more likely option of getting hitched with his close adventuring confidant and fan-favourite character Huntress Wizard. Neither of the successor series directly point one way or the other, though subtext in Fiona and Cake indicates that he's still on good terms with Huntress Wizard, taking his leave in the episode Simon Petrikov to go to her place, indicating that they're at the very least still pretty close several years later. But one deleted scene only indicated by this colour script by series artist Carolyn Ramirez suggested that they may have had some more time together at the very end of the season finale, Cheers. The scene depicts a very Huntress Wizard-like hooded figure looking down towards perhaps another character, resting beneath her. To be fair, it is rather vague, as is the role it may have filled in the storyline, some suggesting it was part of a Where Are They Now segment to wrap up everything else. But since the second season seemed likely amongst members of the crew, and promo art would indicate that Huntress Wizard would play a significant role in the new season, they probably decided to hold off on things for the time being. Then again, I doubt the whole mystery around their relationship is going to be resolved in the season anyway, knowing how particular the showrunners seem to be. Maybe that's because there's conflicting ideas within the writers' room, or because they want to leave enough open-endedness for fanfic writers. But if the scene is what we think it is, then I suppose I ought to congratulate the Finterest Bros for winning the Fin Bowl. Come Along With Me wasn't meant to be the series finale. When the series wrapped up in late 2018, it ran for 8 years and saw about 283 episodes released for it, making it one of the longest Cartoon Network shows ever made. And yet, by the time the crew got their call saying their time was up, there were still a bunch more ideas floating around in their heads. Around the time the finale premiered, prolific background designer Ghost Shrimp will release an episode of his podcast, guest starring series lead writer Kent Osborne. They'll both reflect on their time in the series, but also briefly spend a bit of time chatting about the leftover ideas they have for the series. Apparently another 26 episodes worth of ideas. The most notable of these points included the fact that much of what ended up being Come Along With Me was actually just meant to be part of a 4-part season finale, being just a status quo shift going into the next season. Like how season 6 started with Finn meeting his dad and losing his arm, and also ended with the King of Ooh taking over the Candy Kingdom, for a while at least. The season finale would have involved a mixture of things, with particular focus on Finn, Uncle Gumball, and what Osborne described as mole people, probably similar to the ones that showed up for 2 seconds in the first investigation. The actual final season would focus on elements such as Gumball, a bit more on Sweet Pea's storyline, and maybe a bit on Susan Strong and Minerva, all building up to an actual 4-part finale that was already being sketched out by Tom Herpich. But only the cliff notes were known by Osborne at the time, and it's likely that several other points would have been more conclusively resolved, such as the story behind Fiona and Cake, with a twist being hinted at the end of Fiona and Cake and Fiona, but it wouldn't properly be followed up on until they got their own spin-off series. The crew have also since talked about how many Distant Land specials were based on ideas for miniseries that they had whilst the show was in production, and their position in the continuity suggests that they may have been planned for an extra season of the show. However, whilst the crew were busy working on season 10, they got the call from Cartoon Network telling them that the show would not be renewed for another season, and they granted them a couple more months to come along with me, so that more plot threads could be wrapped up. There was an air of melancholy in the writer's room and the recording studio, but as Osborne would say in another interview, there was also a bit of relief, as the show had gotten renewed so many times that he started worrying that he might have to keep working on it until he was 80. Nevertheless, when the voice actors were given the news, according to Kent, Tom Kenny brought up that he'd just come out from working on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the Powerpuff Girls. In his words, the show ain't going anywhere, and indeed it wasn't, as just a year after the end, Distant Lands would be announced, and just after that wrapped up, Fiona and Cake would be revealed to the world, building upon the old ideas that the team finally had some use for. Just goes to prove that indeed, the fun will never end. The gas station in Bonnabelle Bubblegum. In the season 10 episode Bonnabelle Bubblegum, a rather haunting example of environmental storytelling can be noticed during a brief scene at the start, in which Bonnie scours for an abandoned petrol station to search for supplies. Amongst her trashy posters and magazines, a piece of graffiti telling a 2-sentence long story can be noticed in the background. The top sentence states, "Back soon, XOXO," but is then followed by, "Please come back." The presence of a skull in the corner of the room suggests that perhaps the writer of the second inscription spent the rest of their days rotting away, waiting for perhaps a close family member or a lover to return, hoping that they didn't succumb to the harsh post-war elements. In addition to this, people such as this Redditor have also noticed other small inscriptions in the surrounding area,
such as complicity, now what, and hello,
all of which illustrate a sense of isolation and hopelessness in the state of the outside world, and a shared desire for connection in such uncertain times. Perhaps it was these words that would push Bonnie to create a family for both Neddy and herself later in the episode. The Ice King is an allegory for dementia. Perhaps the most famous example of subtext in the show, the tragedy of the Ice King's character is compounded by the links between his personality and history, and the traits often exhibited by those suffering from dementia. These ideas were brought to the forefront by the iconic episode, aptly titled I Remember You, where we're introduced to the past relationship between Simon and Marceline, except the Ice King is so far gone that he doesn't recall any of it. Marceline tries hard to bring something out of him that can remind him of their time together, but nothing seems to be working, and a lot of the mementos that the Ice King keeps around point towards his mind slipping away from the person he used to be. Lines like, "I'm losing myself, and I'm afraid you're going to lose me too," are included in his old writings to illustrate this mental decline, and are applied beautifully in the episode's emotionally charged ending song Remember You. Such a strong depiction of an illness that has affected millions around the world earned this episode rousing critical acclaim, many of whom regarded it as being the best in the entire series, and its impact can mark the show's true shift towards more serious subject matter. Additional connections can be found in the later episode Simon and Marcy, set during the immediate aftermath of the Great Mushroom War. Whilst it doesn't get as much attention as a previous episode, it offers an interesting look towards what you could describe as an early stage of the illness, as Simon still tries to hold himself together, limiting his exposure to the crown, and reminding himself of better days to avoid slipping away. The moment where he sings the theme tune to Cheers, as he struggles to suppress the power of the crown, is a prime example of this, and he quite literally isn't the same person following this event, appearing much more like the Ice King, and briefly even forgetting Marceline's name, perhaps to signify him entering the next stage of his mental decline. All these facets of his characterization have done wonders at humanizing the experience of suffering from dementia, especially for younger people, and as the population keeps on aging, and diagnoses of the disease continue to grow more prevalent, such a look into its effects and an increase in awareness is needed to provide those affected with care and support, and hopefully place more focus into research, to make sure that someday nobody would have to be inflicted with such a painful state of mind. What is the significance of Cheers? In addition to being a signature scene during Simon's transformation into the Ice King, the inclusion of the Cheers theme song, Where Everybody Knows Your Name, also marks the first time that a pre-existing piece of media is directly referenced in the show. This helped to reinforce the idea that the Land of Vu is indeed a future version of Earth, and later references to other sitcoms from around the same time, such as Mr. Belvedere and Frasier, can indicate that the Mushroom War took place while these shows were at least in recent memory. But amongst all these references to late 20th century pop culture, Cheers would end up becoming by far the most prominent, especially in Fiona and Cake, where the world Simon created has the show as practically the only thing on TV, and even the season 1 finale is named after it. It's led people to wonder why exactly this particular theme song stands out so much amongst the show's concise number of pop culture references. A lot of fans have suggested that the reason why this particular song is used is because of its close connection to Simon's state of mind, especially in Fiona and Cake. It tells a story of taking a break from the hardships of the outside world, to be recognised and to confide in others going through the same problems as you. It could initially reflect Simon's wish for safety, security and community after living through a catastrophic nuclear war as one of its lone survivors, and in Fiona and Cake, he has that safety and security after 1,000 years of living life as the Ice King. Nobody recognises him anymore, treating him like a museum exhibit, only surrounded by facsimiles of his old home comforts. His search for Betty, the one person still around that remembers the time he lived through, can in many ways be motivated by his wish to have a place where people recognise him, and free him from a state of loneliness, something that he finally gets at the end of Season 1, even if it's not in the way he initially hoped. By comparison, Adam Muto himself would weigh in on discussions surrounding the song's inclusion, saying that there wasn't really a deep significance to the song, just as it had a bittersweet sound to it that worked well in the setting, and that could allow it to find a lot of use in different contexts. So, whilst the interpretations of Redditors may not be entirely accurate, technically they still could be true because of how versatile the song is. Our mini intro. At the start of the show's intro, amongst the pre-war trinkets scattered around the field, you might have noticed a severed humanoid arm protruding from a tree, Why it's there, who it could have belonged to, and what it means within the lore of the show has been debated here and there. Some have assumed that it may have been the arm that once belonged to Shoko, Finn's past incarnation, before she got a prosthetic arm, though it appears fleshy and very much still composed after what would have been hundreds of years, so it would be at least kind of impressive for it to stick around like that for so long. Someone else suggested that it may have come from a hug wolf, another said that it may have been from the arm of a zombie, and someone else instead just saw it as a remnant of the violence and brutality of the Mushroom War, as it would fit in with the rest of the items in the same shot. Really though, there isn't really much we can say about it due to it being a small background detail that hasn't really been commented on by the staff. So it may be that, despite being around since the start of the show, this mystery may end up being one of the few that's left unsolved. Australia censorship. Australia's a pretty interesting country. Despite being recognised the world over for its unique brand of edgy and politically incorrect humour, it simultaneously plays host to some of the strictest censorship in the English-speaking world. Just a quick glance at their exceptionally long list of banned video games would tell you that, but these attitudes also apply to other forms of media too, and when Adventure Time was imported into the country, this show would prove to be no exception. Several scenes throughout the series have been cut out of the local release of each episode, to make the show more palatable for family viewing. Now, much of the information that can be found for these standard down versions is from the Adventure Time wiki, and general online word of mouth, so take it with a pinch of salt. But amongst the casualties in the region were the song Baby's Building a Tower into Space, which had all its lyrics removed since Finn was talking about ripping his dad's arm off.
Daddy's got an arm, and baby's gonna harm his arm by tearing it off his dad.
A lot of the more gruesome details in Mortal Recoil were taken out.
What's all that biz?
Bleach, lighter fluid, ammonia, gasoline, I don't know, lady stuff. Plutonium.
No, man. What's all that biz?
I don't know, lady stuff.
No, man.
And the entire scene and storytelling where Finn attempts to get Bubafina and Mr. Fox to kiss was deemed too hot for Australian TV. But the rest of the world isn't off the hook either, as the UK is also known for being especially stringent on its censorship, as Cartoon Network is more explicitly designated as a children's channel by the local regulators. Some edits are a bit more understandable than others.
Dude, we gotta do something to help him.
I could teach him how to not be such a spaz.
But the subject matter to some episodes ended up being so hardcore that they chose not to add them at all. For instance, a two-parter Wake Up and Escape from the Citadel was not shown in the UK, due to all the imagery surrounding Finn losing his arm and a massive flesh gap on Martin's leg. Likewise, the tale would be skipped over due to focusing on Finn's subsequent psychological trauma, and Breezy wouldn't be shown in the UK or Australia because of its family-unfriendly themes. The episode His Hero was also banned in Australia and the Philippines for appearing to teach that violence can solve other people's problems, and you don't need me to tell you that the gay stuff in the later seasons didn't go down too well in certain parts of the world. Even video games have featured examples of regional censorship. In the North American version of Adventure Time Explore the Dungeon Because I Don't Know, when Flame Princess gets into a heated confrontation with PB, she lets out the line,
You tried to destroy me, you tart!
but in the European and Australian release of the game, her insult is shortened down to,
You tried to destroy me, you—
Oh my god!
This is because in classic British and apparently also Australian slang, the word tart is used to denote a prostitute or a promiscuous woman. So basically in this scene she calls PB a hoe, but just sounds like Del Boy when she does it.
Oh, shut up, you tart.
Just goes to show that even in countries as culturally similar as America, Australia and Britain, several concessions had to be made for shows like Adventure Time to fit local sensibilities and company remits. The Scholars of Golb. In the episode Whispers, when the Prime Universe's Lich Hand arrives to tempt the darkness within Sweet Pea, he declares himself to be the last Scholar of Golb, following his philosophy in the total destruction of all life and order in the universe. This is why when talking about the Primordials, Golb isn't mentioned as being amongst them, as the Lich looking up to him implies that he may be a completely separate entity, and could have existed long before even their creation, which may I remind you was also before there was time and before there was nothing. Perhaps I could suggest that Golb exists as the yin to the yang of Prismo's boss, and both of them came about at the ultimate creation of everything ever, though I mainly really say that because there isn't really that much further back we can go. Regardless, though the Lich does claim to be the last person following the philosophy of his old master, the fact that there are still Primordials out there indicates that there might actually be more scholars roaming around too. We just haven't seen much of them, so I guess the Lich is the only one really doing a good job of it. Even Simon might count as a scholar, due to him attempting to harness Golb's power in order to manifest him back into the Prime world and reunite with Betty, who currently shares a physical form with him.
So you don't even need to be an eldritch being to follow in the footsteps of an even more eldritch beast.
All you really need is a desire to engross yourself in the dark practices of the great embodiment of chaos himself. SpongeBob meets the Ice King.
Since the start of the series, Tom Kenny has graced Adventure Time with the excellent range of his performance as Simon Petrikoff, but that isn't the only performance he's known for, having played several major and minor characters in countless animated productions throughout his 4-decade-spanning career. But by far his best-known performance will come in the form of the carefree undersea fry cook SpongeBob SquarePants. Naturally, it'll only be a matter of time before somebody would ask him to act out a scenario where SpongeBob and the Ice King meet up. That time eventually came at the Dallas Fan Expo in 2015, where Tom Kenny briefly improvised an altercation between the Sea Sponge and the King of Ice, after he accidentally entered into SpongeBob's pineapple abode. Though it was their pets who mainly did much of the action. Both Gary and Gunter were also voiced by Kenny.
Gary!
This was later being made into a short animatic by the YouTuber Finn Jr. 63, adding in a few brief action shots to add some visual flair to the conversation. He would even make another animatic, though instead using pre-existing voice lines to the characters, as they chatted amongst each other over a nice relaxing picnic, a step up from their initial confusion the first time round. 3D anime fan game. Releasing its first public beta in 2015, the fan game What If Adventure Time was a 3D anime game was a quaint little project created by online artist Mike Inell, who had recently gained a strong following for his strengths in translating popular Western animated shows into a professional quality anime art style. Gumball and Gravity Falls were amongst the best known examples of this, but a brief short film starring the cast of Adventure Time would also be released around this point, taking audio from the episode Go With Me. Unlike most of his other short films, which focus on 2D animation techniques, this one will be made using 3D CG animation, and the character models used in this short film would later be added to this fan game. The game starts out simple enough, featuring a plot where you venture across the depths of Marceline's cave in search for Jake. After a brief encounter with the Ice King, disguised as the poo-brained horse,
you discover that Jake actually wasn't kidnapped, instead just chilling with Marceline the whole time.
A pretty quick main game, but after that is when you're given time to explore the secrets. Hanging up on Marceline's wall are spaces for 18 pictures. You get one of these when you complete the main game, then you get another for finding all the swords,
which each make use of a surprisingly energetic combat system,
another for discovering all the game's different costumes, and another for discovering the gender-bent world, letting you play for an equally short but far tougher journey with Fiona. And it's not even mentioning all the other secret small worlds that you'll end up finding that all feel very creative and dreamlike, and the game's writing has a very nice hint of self-awareness throughout.
Massive word of warning though, this game isn't for everyone.
On a regular playthrough, the dialogue can be very suggestive, and with a couple settings switched around, the game can quickly turn into a massive sausage fest, and I'm not talking about the dull party kind. But really, this goes to show how much work was put into this, as for something with such risque content, its gameplay really has no right to be this engaging. Sadly though, after a couple years in development, the game would see its last beta release in late 2017, and by early 2020, the project was dropped due to a lack of interest, though Mike still works here and there on little animations, games, and especially art projects to this day. You can find the last demo available for free both on Mike's Patreon and on the Internet Archive, though obviously you shouldn't play through it if you're under 18. By the way, you shouldn't really be here if you're under 18 anyway.
This isn't really for you. I know it sounds rich considering I'm talking about a show for children, but really, it's for your own good, son.
The Legend of Lucky Pie. This is a series of short animated films from China released between 2015 and 2018, starring an owl-like adventurer named R. Pie and his trusty horse companion Lucky, as they journey around a brightly coloured land saving a bunch of mythical creatures. These aspects of the plot resulted in many Westerners being quick to deride it as being a knockoff of Adventure Time, hailing from a country stereotype for holding a heavy industry of off-brand products, with similar criticisms being directed towards another contemporary short series, Miracle Star, due to its even more egregious similarities to the amazing world of Gumball. But by comparison, whilst Miracle Star was noted for heavily replicating the art style of Gumball, sometimes even using shot-for-shot recreations of certain scenes, Lucky Pie definitely feels much more like the writers were paying homage to Adventure Time, presenting several unique characters, a vibrant art style, as well as a more limited but still rather dynamic animation style, characteristic of popular donghua techniques. To even consider it a cash grab intended to trick parents into buying the wrong version of a show would also be a rather strange accusation, as, again, unlike Miracle Star, which was created to advertise a brand of powdered milk, Lucky Pie was created by a small team of self-funded animators, releasing their work for independent avenues to go against the safe and stale mainstream of Chinese animation at the time. It was essentially an indie cartoon long before the likes of VisiPop or Glitch Productions would make such a format popular in the West, as more people took notice of the initial shorts and its 4 sequels, some even gaining English dubs later on. Lucky Pie would end up developing its own identity, and many would finally recognise the team's efforts in spite of their low budget and lack of professional backing. Even Steve Wolfhard would approve of the first episode, describing it as a rather cute experience,
and Mike Inell would even include one of the show's characters, Princess Flying Fish, in its Adventure Time fan game.
Fiona and Cake started out on 4chan. It's a pretty open secret that a lot of online phenomena, especially in the late 2000s, got its start on 4chan.
To name a couple examples,
The iconic online collaboration project, the SCP Foundation, all started with a post to the X board in 2007, and the Brony fandom would gain traction in late 2010, after an article criticising friendship as magic was posted to the code board. But around the same time, something else would also emerge within the code board with a continued effect on pop culture, this being the creation of Fiona and Cake. The two character stories would begin when this pic was posted onto 4chan by Natasha Allegri herself, filling in a request for a fellow Ann on an agenda bent thread. Nat was actually a fairly frequent poster to the code board around 2010 or so, even posting a comic at some point where Penn Ward warns her about the dangers of posting on such a scandalous site. It would only get more scandalous over the decade, and you'd rarely if ever see someone like her posting there nowadays, but I digress. Regardless, there are still signs that suggest she looks back on her time posting drawings for interested Allons rather fondly, as a 2023 Twitter post would also be made by her, saying that even the names Fiona and Cake were made up by people posting on the board, and she thought the name sounded cute, so they kinda stuck. It's not really that surprising, all things considered, that Fiona, Cake, and Agenda Bent Land of R would make their debut in an episode that mainly made jabs at fandom culture and fanfiction tropes. Of course, they added a healthy dose of deep lore on the top of it at the end, but it is interesting to think that this mainstay of a show held in some circles for its progressive themes would start out on a site that back then, and especially since, has been derided by mainstream online and offline culture as an internet hate machine. Simo and Pahoy. In the episode Be More, we learn about the origins of Finn and Jake's digital companion Bimo, the man behind his creation, as well as the extended Moko family he belongs to. Several of these helpful little guys are introduced to us, ranging from the short and bulking Esmos, to the sleek and calculated Demos, all the way down to the small and caring Cmos. Except, we've actually seen the latter of these in an earlier episode, namely Pahoy, released a couple of months earlier, in which one of them lands on top of Finn alongside Bimo, after Jake throws a bunch of pillows down. This could suggest that in addition to Bimo, Finn and Jake actually own several other Mos around their home, though they're rarely if ever seen, probably just scurrying around the floorboards and ceilings like computer mice. Though this could also just be a little hint towards the upcoming episode,
as it was storyboarded by the same two people who went on to make Be More,
and they probably just had the design on their minds. Princess Bubblegum's family portraits. This next one's kinda unique since I'm not really relying on someone else's Reddit post to explain it. It's just more something fairly interesting I noticed whilst watching through the whole series a little while back. So, in the season 1 episode The Duke, whilst Princess Bubblegum is being tended to after being splashed by a nasty potion, we can very briefly see a picture to the left of her, showing her with a much older Candy person.
This character doesn't really hold much of a resemblance to how Aunt Lolly would appear later in the show,
instead holding the appearance of someone akin to her grandmother, perhaps a Candy Queen to her title of Princess. There's also a second portrait of a bubblegum-like person with ginger hair, appearing more like a mother or sister type. Knowing what we know now, maybe these portraits are signs of other family members created by PB for both Neddy and herself, except they turned out much more successfully than before, and didn't need a splash of dum-dum juice to pacify them. Maybe the second figure was also bubblegum, using a couple of special serums to change her appearance around. All in all though, these are probably all just signs of what TV tropes are described plainly as early installment weirdness.
Like how the first Doctor in Doctor Who was described as having one heart instead of his later two,
or when the Klingons in the original Star Trek looked like this, or, you know, when Finn was called Penn. Perhaps these portraits were from around a time when PB actually had a biological family, besides Neddy and the Mother Gun, who may have aged more similarly to humans. It also suggests that around this point in time in the writing process, she actually was around 18 years old at the time, instead of turning out to be hundreds of years old. That point wouldn't end up coming into the show until Princess Cookie in Season 4. These are all just little features that get thrown around here and there while the team is experimenting, but they end up feeling a bit weird with the power of hindsight. Enchiridion unused title card. Being amongst the first episodes of the series to ever be produced, the Enchiridion holds one of the most iconic title cards in the long list that the series ended up going through. But whilst the one we are given is noted for being rather unusual and generally being unrelated to the subject matter of the episode, as were a lot of title cards at the time, there exists a fully produced variant that presents a much more gruesome take on the little play fight between Finn and Jake. The original pose was directly taken from the cover of an old science fiction magazine, likely influencing the comic art style of both this title card and the many title cards that followed after it. Once a basic pose featuring the main duo based on the cover was sketched out, a more developed version would be worked on by the artists, showing Jake being pinned down by Finn onto a busy table. Further touch-ups though were made to take the edge off the whole thing, and make Finn look less murderous, swapping out a dagger with a large French baguette, which actually kind of fits the scene now I think about it. But these changes didn't appear to be enough for standards and practices, who wanted it to be better communicated that Finn wasn't trying to kill Jake. So they went back again, got rid of the mess on the table, brightened the background up a bit, and had both of them smiling rather than playing the roles. Though this was the one that ultimately got pushed through, a third variant of the card would also be made, going all the way in the opposite direction, keeping the original violence imagery and turning it up to 11. Here, Finn still has a dagger, and is shown to have actually used it this time, leaving it covered in blood, while Jake carries a massive stab wound, and his entrails are seen sprawled around him. For someone who's more familiar with the S&P approved title card, Taking a look at this one will make you think it was made by some edgy teenager for some lost episode creepypasta, but I guess you'll be surprised by how wild those artists can get when they got time on their hands. How did Abe Lincoln become the King of Mars? When the pilot episode was released to the world all the way back in 2007, one of the most memorable highlights of its random humour would come in the form of a surprise guest appearance by 16th US President Abraham Lincoln, who delivered some wise words to Finn on Mars before sending him back to fight the Ice King.
This one-off event would eventually be followed up in the episode Sons of Mars,
where he's seen again as a King of Mars. But while several other examples of the early show's randomness have been rationalised as the series went along, the reason why Honest Abe of all people was made King of the Red Planet was never properly explained. In the episode that introduced him, it's implied that he made a deal with death to avoid his own demise in our world,
by being granted immortality thanks to his help.
Eventually though, Lincoln had to give this up, and sacrifice his privilege in order to save Jake after accidentally killing him. The sound of a gunshot going off afterwards implies that this resulted in Lincoln returning to his old time period, to relive the assassination that would ultimately get him. An understandable round-off for the plotline, but it all gets thrown out once he shows up in the episode Orgalog,
during a flashback scene set thousands of years ago,
long before the real Abe Lincoln was alive. This could mean that Abe's wish for immortality stipulates that they had to go back in time and live through the creation of Martian society first, or perhaps he may not even be the real Abe Lincoln at all, just some human-like creature who happens to look exactly like him. I guess I can explain his weird vocal characteristics. As compared to the mellowed-out personality and rural accent he's often depicted with, this Lincoln is much more gruff, assertive, and I suppose more alien than the guy himself. So he may or may not be the real Lincoln, but he does still seem like the kind of guy who would have had a decorated career as a wrestler. Fiona and Cake's universes are based on common fanfic AUs. When Fiona and Cake were first introduced to the series back in 2011, they served as an affectionate parody of fandom culture, particularly the show's fandom by the time the episode was written, placing focus on the gender-bent type of AU, or alternate universe, that was occasionally explored in fanfiction and fan art by both their fandom, as well as the fandoms of several other shows. Though Fiona and Cake would grow into its own thing throughout the show's run, when the duo got their own spin-off, much of these settings explored by them can be traced back to fanfiction tropes and themes, as discussed by the Reddit user Fruitsaw Reborn. The main setting of Midtown, the current state of Fiona's world, is a prime example of this, as in addition to of course showing off a gender-bent AU, it also features a modern setting AU, more commonly known as a coffee shop AU or some variant of that. This essentially changes the setting of the series to something far more mundane and relatable, sometimes even giving the characters more natural sounding names, with the only real similarity being the characters' personalities and relationship dynamics, making them very easy to translate into completely original literary works. In addition though, there are also several other worlds exhibited in the series that can also apply to certain AUs. The Winter Kingdom is an example of a swap AU,
where at least two major characters in the series, usually holding different alignments or personality types,
have these attributes swapped out while still maintaining their own unique identities. The World of the Star can also be an example of a vampire AU, with how much attention is given to the tropes around vampirism, or also an example of the worst timeline, in that certain events have come to pass that have resulted in the remnants of humanity fighting for survival. The Lich's world is described as an everybody dies AU, considering everybody's dead, Dave, whilst the brief scene of an adult Finn venturing with Jake, though often interpreted as an old recording played by a depressed Prismo, could be seen as an everybody lives AU.
Perhaps even the farm world could be seen as an example of a no magic AU,
as a sort of in-between against a modern AU and a regular U, as while society is comparatively more medieval in its technology and layouts, several more fantastical elements, such as anthropomorphic animals, are absent, and outliers like the Ice Crown, the Mushroom Bomb, and Marceline still being alive are just remnants from a strange moment in Earth's history. Though some worlds are easier to connect to this theory than others, the fact that you can connect this many popular fanfiction settings into each of them just goes to show that even now, Fiona and Cake still serves as a love letter to the wide realm of fandom. Alternatively, the universes are wish worlds created by different characters. Though the previous theory can indicate a more behind-the-scenes explanation for the types of worlds explored in Fiona and Cake,
here we're given a more in-universe or lore-centric explanation for their existence. The world of Jerry, or the Lich, is the most obvious example of this, being a manifestation of the world wished into existence by the Lich in the Season 5 premiere, where he desires to bring about a world in which all life is destroyed.
Prismo's wish world, however, also comes with a monkey's paw, as while the Lich gets what he wants, with the destruction of all life,
the 15 or so year drought of life to destroy drives him to a state of inertia and a feeling of emptiness.
A deleted Reddit user, however, has also suggested that several other universes in this series may have also been a result of wishes made by the show's main cast, each with their own complementary monkey's paw to add some unforeseen consequences.
Besides the farm world, which was already created by Finn in Season 5,
the Winter Kingdom, according to this theory, was created by Marceline as a way to help rid Simon of the effects of the crown, whilst this part of the witch goes as planned. In order to achieve these desired effects, the elements of the crown had to be transferred to someone else, in this case Marceline's soulmate Bonnabelle. On the other hand, a relatively minor universe is also included in this chart, this being the Baby AU as you could probably call it. This world was a creation of Bonnabelle, who sought to find a way that allowed for an end to all conflict, and guaranteed safety for all of Vu's citizens. As it turns out, the only way to really guarantee this safety is for everyone to be dumb little babies, constantly under the supervision of their gumball guardians. It seems to work though, as the only thing needed to stop even the lich is just a few minutes in timeout. Fiona and Buttopia. In the episode Buttopia, we're given our first look into what looks to be an entire society of humans, or humans if you want to be particular about it. As we travel into Susan Strong's subterranean home, we quickly learn though that a lack of light within this hovel has resulted in the settlement being overrun by several shadowy figures known as love globs, often disguising themselves as pool toys, before emerging in the dark to feast on Buttopia's inhabitants. We end up seeing this feasting in action, though thankfully we're spared the gory details, only seeing their skulls adorned with their hats, the last remnants of their identities. One of the hats though appears to be shaped in a rather familiar way, taking the form of Fiona's hat, complete with her signature white bunny ears. Whilst this probably isn't the real Fiona and probably just a reference to the storyboarder's other work, like the appearance of Simo and Pahoy, the appearance of such a particular fashion choice really makes you wonder if the human settlements of this world may have their own Fiona-like person out there.
That other Fiona doesn't count though. She's just a bunny.
At chronology.com. This refers to a website created by Jagam, I think that's how I pronounce that, which intends to tell the entire chronology of events throughout the multiverse of the series, starting before time itself at the age of the primordial monsters, all the way up to the destruction of the sun several billion years into Oo's future. The site primarily consists of a long and detailed account concerning items such as the world's history, the structure of the multiverse, how magic works, and the role of the cosmic entities. Each of these details come with a citation from a particular episode or external piece of media, though most of the latter, including most of the comics and other forms of literature, are marked as non-canon. Canon in this sense is determined by whether or not something is written by the main crew of the show, doesn't contradict anything that is written in the mainline series, is endorsed by Cartoon Network, and isn't a crossover with an unrelated IP. This means that comics and books like the Adventure Time Encyclopedia and the Marcy and Simon miniseries, written by voice actors Martin Olsen and Olivia Olsen respectively, don't count as canon and have since been retconned by later events in the mainline shows, though content like Marcy and Simon is also included in a complete timeline, including non-canon comics, as an alternative and much more positive ending to the events of the original series. The site also takes a lot of inspiration from similar fan projects that came before it, and uses fan theories to fill in smaller gaps in the canon, such as when exactly the Mushroom War took place, in this case referring to a Tumblr post that placed its occurrence around 2010, due to a lunar eclipse taking place around this time that appeared similar to the one mentioned in the episode Ketchup. Jagam also backs this up based on the characters using slang and technology indicative of the time period, though at the same time he also mentions that these theorised dates for the war can range from anywhere between the 1970s and the 2040s.
And the application of an exact year is just done for the ease of browsing.
Beyond this timeline though, there are also a couple other features of the site, including a blog announcing new content that may or may not add to the overall canon of the series, as well as perhaps the most comprehensive list of Adventure Time related media on the internet, from the pilot to Fiona and Cake, the upcoming projects, and the various comic series, all the way down to special promo material and behind the scenes featurettes, and each of them is categorised by their canonicity. So far, all three of the announced upcoming projects, including Heyo Bimo, are marked as canon, though this of course may change depending on what comes next in other mainline productions. At chronology.com stands as one of the finest examples of fan-made projects amongst the series' expansive fandom sphere, cramming in as much information as possible from the source material, and working closely with several online fan groups to bring about a sense of order in the chaos of navigating the show's expansive multiverse of lore. 5 Gold Stars, an Adventure Time doujinshi. Not to be confused with Gold Stars, the episode where the Lich drops his primordial monologue. This is the name of a rare example of an Adventure Time doujinshi, illustrated by Westerboo artist Marimiya of the Telekinesis Doujin Circle. For those less to know about manga terminology, a doujinshi is generally a catch-all term used to describe a self-published or amateur manga, though it's most often associated with either porn, or in this case comics starring pre-existing characters. Due to differences in Japanese copyright law, these comics can't be charged with copyright infringements unless the original rights owner makes a complaint, though there are a few outliers who are incredibly particular about brand integrity.
Most companies and mangakas just choose to leave these artists to their own devices.
This allows for people to not only release their own derivative works, but even sell them for a small fee, something that practically never happens in the West, creating a sphere within this niche of manga that sees several market events popping up just dedicated to doujinshi. The largest of these, Comiket, sees around 30,000 artists and 500,000 visitors participating in the event twice a year. Such an expensive breadth of artists allows for even more minor properties such as those from outside Japan to get their time in the spotlight, and among them is Adventure Time. This particular doujin appears to be an anthology, which mainly focuses on the relationships between 5 pairs of characters. Some are fraternal like Finn and Jake, but most are romantic, and since this is Japanese fandom we're talking about, many of these pairings can fall under the categories of yaoi and yuri. Phoebe and Marceline aren't any less popular this side of the world, and And there's also a rather interesting pairing between Finn and his ice crown affected self from the farm world, which alongside his later pairing with Fern, would gain a fair bit of interest in Eastern fandom circles, due to having the right dynamic to capture Fujo's attention. Unfortunately though, there isn't really much I can say about it outside of its listing on Alice Books and the fanlore wiki, as even if I could read Japanese, the book is sadly no longer available for purchase. But the thing about 5 Gold Stars is that it isn't alone in its status as a doujin based on the show, as there's also the rest of the story by Oita, starring LSP and Lemongrab as they spend their days together following the finale. Even other shows that got far less attention, even by their own studios like Netflix's Inside Job, have examples of doujin fluff available for purchase. It really makes you wonder how much work could be made by the fans if they are granted the same freedom to create that many of those in Japan have, allowing for the creation of entire professional quality works of comic art that could even grab the attention of the show's original team. Nevertheless, whilst there are a few notable exceptions on platforms such as Webtoon and Tapas, most Western fan comics in the series never seem to gain as much traction as they would in Japan, and you rarely find ones that do that aren't just porn. Candies and Zambies. Similarly to theories that suggest that the events of Adventure Time are just a kid playing D&D either with his dad or older brother, this AU, created in the early days of the series by Fallen Junior Blue, or Blue Junior for short, shows us a world where the episodes are just campaigns done by a bunch of high school mates as part of the tabletop game Candies and Zambies. It's essentially a high school AU with a couple extra quirks to it. Finn is an ambitious and adventurous guy who got the game from his older brother Billy, and Jake is his wise best friend, and a DM for most of the campaigns who claims to have a Korean girlfriend. We then see this girlfriend, named Iris Han, when she arrives at the school after having an online relationship with Jake, taking the role of Lady Rainicorn in the campaigns. Bimo is played by Finn's excitable younger brother, PB is played by Patsy Bonnabelle, a shy fashionista who secretly crushes on Finn, while Marceline is the artsy only child of a single father, who spends a lot of time away working as a lawyer. LSP, or Lucia Selena Palomo, is a feisty drama queen who only shows up to campaigns to hit on Finn, and Flame Princess shows up later as Fulky Patel, Finn's new neighbour from California, who he drags to campaigns despite her not really getting it at first. Blue Junior will make a few sketches connecting the events of many of the show's episodes to the rolls of the 20-sided dice, like how Jake's poorly timed fart in Death and Bloom was a result of him rolling a 1 for stealth, whilst he used a 20 to lend his foot on Ash at the end of Memory of a Memory. There are also several cases where their own personal lives seep into the campaigns, like how the events of Too Young and the character of Lemongrab were based on PB's overprotective uncle, who didn't want her hanging around with boys until she was 18, and Frost and Fire was a result of FP growing tired of the game and choosing to spend some time on her own, much to the celebration of PB. Eventually though, around season 6 or so, Blue Junior would lose interest in the AU, as did the characters in the universe, only coming back occasionally to cover certain later season episodes like the Wild Hunts, except this time, Huntress was to also be played by Marceline, as opposed to another original character. This may seem like a strange choice for certain fan circles, as Bubbline had been largely cemented in the show by this time. Some annals on 4chan suggested that the relationship came about in PB and Marceline's campaigns, because they just rolled more 20s than they expected and they just ran with it, choosing to switch to other characters later on. Marceline either gravitated towards Huntress Wizard or Bronwyn, though some also suggest that LSP might have taken on the former role after going through a bad breakup. All this relationship stuff, particularly surrounding Finn, naturally gave this AU a surprising amount of staying power on the boards, helped by the creator occasionally posting his work to Koen TG, that's the traditional games board. He would even return to the spotlight around the time Distant Lands came out, creating a couple pics depicting the characters coming back to the game in their college years, and it seems both Marceline and LSP are still pretty close with Finn. Unfortunately, trying to find much of these old and especially new pictures is now far more difficult, as Blue Junior would deactivate his DeviantArt account around late 2023, after 17 years on the site. However, there are still a couple re-uploads circling around on a few archive threads, though they do end up being a bit questionable at times, though that may not be surprising considering this is like 4chan we're talking about, so I would suggest proceeding with caution if you ever do decide to learn more. Farewell, Pat. Good luck in New York. In the episode Heat Signature, Finn and Jake are tricked into thinking they're vampires as part of a prank pulled by Marceline and her ghostly friends, though the ghosts end up going a bit too far, kicking them to test their strength, throwing off a building to see if they can fly, and finally performing a ritual on them during a party at their place. It's actually just to harvest their guts. During this ritual, they chant what sounds like a haunting incantation, though when you play it in reverse, it takes on a much lighter tone. This was snuck in by the crew as a leaving message for the early season creative director Patrick McHale, who was leaving the team to go live in New York with his wife Jiwook Kim, who he would later work with on her animated short film Blackford Manor. Just a little after the move, he would also start work on his own short film, Tomb of the Unknown, released at several film festivals in 2013, and later developing it into arguably his best known and most critically acclaimed work, Over the Garden Wall. So he may have been gone from the crew around this point, but his best days were still ahead of him. And who knows, perhaps he may still be ahead of him. Maybe the studios might grant him another big opportunity around the near future, continuing the long-spanning career
of one of modern animation's most talented people.
Gunter Offspring Original Art. In the episode Chamber of Frozen Blades, Gunter, or at least a Gunter, comes down with something bad, prompting the Ice King to take him to Dr. Princess and oversell the illness to get the best treatment out of her. At the end of the episode, this Gunter is revealed to be ill because she, or he, you can never really be too sure, is pregnant, and pregnant with something rather unusual. Once this Gunter finally lays an egg, it's revealed that they were carrying a magic floating kitten that also turns out in a later episode to have the ability to shoot lasers. Though this kitten was the character design originally intended by storyboarder Adam Muto, story editor Furret Van Orman, of Flapjack fame, would chime in with a different suggestion. Instead of having the reveal be kind of random, he also wants it to be a bit shocking, suggesting that this offspring instead be a weird combination of Gunter and the Ice King. Muto initially liked how the idea sounded, so he would rework the storyboard to feature this horrific homunculus, though once he got the standards and practices, they shot the idea down, probably because of the implications surrounding who the father might be. Fate of the Pillow World. In the episode Pahoy, Finn spends what feels like a lifetime in the pocket dimension of the Pillow World, getting married, having a family, and finally dying, all while being in search of a way out. Once he passes on from this realm, he returns to his home world,
as if just a few minutes had passed.
The immediate assumption is that the Pillow World is merely a dream, a construct of Finn's imagination, hence why time works so differently there. But this is all complicated by one particular set piece after Finn dies. As Finn flies through the void, we see Gulp for the very first time. Finn manages to skirt past him, but his presence could imply that the Pillow World was indeed an alternative dimension, accessed by Finn during a knife rainstorm, which, as we discussed earlier, could be a time of great interdimensional flux. The arrival of Gulp could signify that this dimension was visited by him to consume it, just as Finn escapes it through death. Alternatively, we could suggest that the Pillow World died with Finn, but just in a different and more related way. Chronology.com touches on the structure of the multiverse, based on a passage in the Enchiridion and Marcy's super secret scrapbook, indicating that the multiverse in this series isn't necessarily a physical thing, but rather a product of the collective consciousness covering all sentient beings, as without these beings, there would simply be nothing to perceive it. Like that thing that people say about how, if nobody's there to hear a tree fall, does it even make a sound? I mean, it probably does, but you get what I mean. The Pillow World shattering into nothing following Finn's death suggests that he was the last sentient being in this dimension, and everything around him was just realised through his mind. This could end up suggesting that it could be a dream world, but at the same time, it takes a tangible form for the duration of its visitor's dream. Then again, maybe the Pillow World did indeed continue on as normal with Finn gone, and maybe he just came across Gulp during his spirit's transit between dimensions, and that's the best sounding choice, so we'll probably discover that. Finn's birthmark. Though we don't see it in the show itself, there's what initially sounds like a throwaway line in the episode crossover, hinting at a birthmark relating to Finn's spiritual history. This line is heard when Finn communicates with his farm world self, trying to force him out of the Ice Crown's control. Finn reminds him of who he is, using very intimate knowledge about himself, including his full name, the name of his pet dog and closest companion, as well as the fact that he has a birthmark in a really weird place. This mark is described as looking like a sideways flaming teardrop, something that can very easily be used to describe a comet and its tail, once again hinting at Finn's past life as a blue catalyst comet. Though considering Finn's hint towards its location, it's unlikely we'll end up seeing it in an upcoming series. Adventure Time and Bravest Warriors are set in the same universe. Amongst all the other projects that Penn Ward had a hand in creating outside of Adventure Time, there was one I neglected to mention up until now, this being the web series Bravest Warriors, uploaded as part of Frederator's Cartoon Hangover YouTube channel, which in spite of its behind-the-scenes trouble still holds a sizable cult following today. In fact, I actually got into Bravest Warriors before deciding to really get invested into Adventure Time to see what the hype was about, plus I really needed something to bridge that painfully long gap between seasons 2 and 3 of the show, so Adventure Time helped a lot in that respect. Anyway,
though both shows are often regarded as Penn's most popular creations,
some fans have started to notice some interesting similarities between them besides their creator. A now deleted Reddit user would collect a few findings that help reinforce this theory, starting with the settings for both shows. Based on estimates surrounding when the Mushroom War took place, we could assume that Adventure Time is set somewhere around the year 3000, whilst Bravest Warriors is specifically set in the year 3085. This gives us a fair bit of time for Mars to radically transform into the Neo-Mars we've seen in the latter show,
and there are a couple hints as it has indeed radically transformed.
In the first season of Bravest Warriors, the episode Serial Master starts with an advertisement encouraging people to leave Mars, because it's already overcrowded, implying that there was a massive population boom relatively recently. We're looking at the outfits of the main cast and the human side characters, as well as the architecture of Neo-Mars. All of it appears reflective of the Founders Island and their local culture. But then there's perhaps the most compelling similarity, the fact that both shows have a giant hole in their version of Earth, as seen in this brief vision by the character Chris in the episode Ultra Wankisham. What distinguishes Bravest Warriors as Earth is that their giant hole appears much smaller, and is surrounded by a blocky appearance that appears to be covering it up. These signs all point to the idea that once the society of the Founders Island started to open up towards the end of the series, they not only set their sights on Ooo, but also up to the stars, and even used their technology to fix the errors they made in the past. And this isn't even including the additional comments left by user Morgoth333, who touches on all aspects of Bravest Warriors, even the Overlook 4 season done by another team. For instance, the character of Imposter Bear appears somewhat similar to the race of bear-like creatures Martin discovers in the episode On the Lam. Meanwhile, the Eon Worm in Season 2 wouldn't look out of place amongst the lineup of Primordials, and the episode This Is Not My Beautiful House sees the appearance of an alien character who very closely resembles what would have been a native Martian from Adventure Time, with the baldness issue apparently now being cleared up. When we underline this with how similar the characters like Danny and Chris look to figures such as Frida, Susan, and even Finn from Adventure Time, perhaps being direct descendants of any of them, or hell, even maybe one of Finn's next incarnations in the case of Chris, looking deep enough into Bravest Warriors might make it feel like a sequel series, before the elements it was following up on were even introduced in the original show. Scientific parasites. One small feature that is often seen amongst more sciencey characters but is rarely brought to attention is the presence of small, almost imperceptible creatures in the pockets of their lab coats or blazers. Most of them appear similar to Shelby's little brother Kent's, but they can also take on other forms, such as this horse-looking creature on Dr. Ice Cream. The presence of one of these parasites on Simon, before he became the Ice King, also implies that they were a frequent sight even before the Great Mushroom War, perhaps not possessing the same magical qualities of other post-war beings. Character designer Natasha Allegri explains that these creatures can be found where they are because they feed off the brainwaves of intelligent people, hence the name scientific parasites, because they feed off science. She would even include what looks like a scientific parasite in an early sketch of Bee's dad and Bee and Puppycat, the trilogy we're going to create. Though they hold a similar status to that of the snail, due to them only showing up briefly as a minor feature of an episode, unlike the snail, they've never really been given much attention in any episode, never mind any answers to the question of what exactly they are and where they came from. Nevertheless, we do briefly see that they are capable of displaying emotions, with one appearing visibly distressed after Simon uses the Ice Crown towards the end of Simon and Marcy, so they may turn out to be pretty complex creatures, though sadly they remain one of the show's few unsolved mysteries and underutilized concepts. Princess Cookie straight up commits suicide. Princess Cookie is a pretty weird episode, even for the show standards. Not only does it reveal the ambiguities of PB's age for the first time, but the entire episode is centered around what can basically be described as a G-rated hostage situation, motivated by one Candy citizen's wish to become a princess just like the woman he idolized as a child. Eventually, after Finn and Jake arrive into the store to defuse the situation, the self-proclaimed Princess Cookie uses Jake's magical dog powers to ride on them into the sunset. Though he is eventually captured by the banana guards, the experience of, albeit briefly, living the life of a princess allowed him to feel fulfilled, and so to avoid a lifetime behind bars,
he decides to die happy by jumping into a pit and exploding into several pieces.
Thankfully, he is put back together and continues to live on, though this time as someone institutionalized in a mental facility. All in all, a pretty dark scenario for the series, at least so far. Though it apparently managed to air in quite a few territories without any significant censorship, at least according to the wiki. And those guys tend to be pretty thorough with those things, so if there was something worth censoring, then they'd probably put it in. Despite all that, if you take away the fact that most of the characters are made of candy, its plot wouldn't really feel too out of place in one of those especially topical episodes of SVU. Maggie the Vampire Spoon. Shortly before the series premiered, leaks started to emerge featuring the designs of the show's characters, and on the code board, Marceline's would end up attracting the most attention. There were, however, a lot of other Anons who didn't really get the hype, as it felt strange that so many people would grow so attached to what many thought looked like a spoon with hair. Some Drawfellows responded to these comments by creating an original character who embodied this spooniness, named Maggie.
But she was largely similar in appearance to Marceline, with the exception of a bow and an even lankier body.
Anons pledged from that day forward to love her just as much as the original Marceline. Though her presence was a nuisance to janitors, I don't even think they were called Jannies yet, who were looking to enforce 4chan's rules against using avatars and role-playing, Maggie would become a frequent sight on the board, adopting many of the quirks associated with female co-users, in spite of some believing that they didn't exist. She would later be joined by Dipper, regarded as a love child between her and the Drawfred regular Mandingo. Maggie was the father in this relationship, by the way. Even Natasha Allegri during her days on the board would make fan art of the character who had essentially evolved into being one of the board's mascots. And some think it's no coincidence that the outfit Marceline wears when it came from the Nightosphere bears a striking resemblance to Maggie's iconic striped sweater. Nowadays, while the glory days of the character are now behind us, you can still catch a glimpse of her on very rare occasions, asking what's for breakfast, the most important meal of the day.
Xbox Live avatar items. In late 2012, shortly before the series got its first game, Microsoft will release a wide range of outfits themed around Adventure Time, which could be purchased on the Xbox Live store for a player's avatar. A grand total of around 30 items were released to the marketplace, ranging from t-shirts featuring the characters just plastered on, to more detailed and show-accurate outfits such as Marceline's Maggie S sweater and Finn's shirt, signature backpack included. There are also hats, including baseball caps, the Ice King's crown, and of course Finn's iconic bear-shaped headwear, as well as additional items such as Finn's sword and Marceline's axe base, all the way up to a full-body costume of Magic Man. Naturally though, since the Xbox Live store closed down around mid-2024, assuming the items weren't already delisted by this point, all these outfits are now no longer available and have basically become another case of lost media.
But if you did manage to get these outfits whilst they were still available, then now might be a good time to go ahead and try and dig them out, and style your character like it's 2012 again.
ZX Spectrum fangame. Whilst Mike and Elle's Adventure Time fangame definitely gained the most attention online, it wasn't the only time that somebody had a crack at making a game based around the series, as around then, another fangame was also being worked on. This time, however, it was designed specifically for 30-plus-year-old hardware. This game, simply titled Flame Princess Adventure Time, was released to the public in 2016, as homebrew software for the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, a relatively obscure home computer during the computing boom of the 1980s, created by a British manufacturer, before being shipped out across Western Europe and in a more limited capacity in the United States. The computer though would gain a strong cult following in Spain, thanks to its low cost and ease of use of programmers, and a sizable homebrew scene still exists in the country today. Amongst these is the developer Radistan, who created this game using an engine by the Mojon twins, two other Spanish homebrew developers who are basically the kings of the scene. Anyway, here you control Flame Princess, as the title suggests, as you traverse a few short worlds, collecting keepers and fighting off these grey blob creatures using a limited number of fireballs. Also, you can save Finn after he's being kidnapped by the Ice King. So it's like a spin on Frost and Fire, except, you know, good. The game may not be the longest, it's pretty lacking in sound, and its controls are a bit awkward due to being built around the Spectrum's wonky keyboard, but it is pretty nice looking for Spectrum standards, and just the novelty alone makes it worth checking out for a little bit. It has fallen under the radar compared to a lot of other fan projects. I didn't even know it existed until I browsed Launchbox's game database. But it is available online both to download and also play on an online emulator, which I'll link in the description. Besides, it is a pleasant surprise to see an entire fan game related to a ship that's kinda dried up in recent years. I mean, it is pretty rare to see a fan game based on any ship in the series, let alone one made for your dad's first computer. Prismo's boss is Pen Ward. Whenever Prismo's boss is brought up on the show, he's nice seen and never heard. Whoever he may be remains a mystery in both the original series and in Fiona and Cake, though his authority above people like Prismo implies his role as a god/creator figure in the overarching multiverse. But what form would this god take? Perhaps he's incomprehensible to his subjects within the show's setting, though to us, he can instead be an everyday normal guy who just had an idea and willed it into existence. Besides, that idea is not too different from what we discussed in the Enchiridion, in which a multiverse is described as a product of subconscious thoughts, brought into being by simply perceiving it, and there's probably no other person who could perceive it better than the man who created it all. Well, besides maybe Muto and the rest of the writing team, maybe those guys are like co-gods or something. Speaking of which, that could also explain why Flapjack is still canon to the overall multiverse, despite being partly worked on but not created by Ward himself. As Prismo says when it pops up in the long list of universes, it was already here before he created any of his own wish worlds. This can all point back to the ideas brought up in my last Iceberg video, about fictional worlds being manifested into a tangible form through the work of creators, essentially making them gods of their own creation, all within a wider pantheon of related creators with their own domains. Plus it would be kind of funny to hear Pen's chill voice come out of this booming godlike figure in a later iteration of the show. Grob Gob Glob Grod's planned voices.
In an article released during the production of Sons of Mars,
Pen Ward would talk about an idea that he briefly thought up when planning he was going to voice the characters of Grob Gob Glob Grod. Nailed it. Instead of a few frequent voice actors for the series, Pen was planning on having the collective be one, or four, of the many characters voiced by celebrity guests, like how Rattleballs was voiced by Rainn Wilson, the Flame King by Keith David, Don John by Rowdy Roddy Piper, and Frida by Jessica Nicole. In this case, Pen wants to reflect the quartet's collective structure by having them all be voiced by four guys named Bill. In this case, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Bill Murray, Bill Cosby, and even Bill Clinton, US President number 42. Obviously, this idea never went beyond being just an idea, as trying to get all four famous people into a room with the schedules they had and the budget Cartoon Network had would just be a logistical nightmare. Though it does sound like a fun idea, knowing what we know now, it's safe to say that Pen dodged a bullet by leaving it as just a thought in his head. Castle Lemongrab is an allegory for North Korea.
It's pretty rare that Adventure Time would make allegories towards real-world political situations. Most of the times that they do show up tend to just be coincidences. But when examining the events of the Lemonhope duology, particularly the depiction of the Earldom of Lemongrab, it's surprisingly easy to notice the parallels between them and the Hermit Kingdom. Much of these comparisons can be very clearly illustrated in the opening of Lemonhope Part 1, in which we're given a full propaganda film issued to outsiders by the Earl of Lemongrab, just the first one by now, complete with Soviet-esque uplifting classical music. It does, however, appear to be much more honest than your average state-sponsored presentation, depicting the types of torture employed on their citizens to maintain obedience, as well as the destruction of items belonging to rebels that may remind them of a better way. This is all punctuated by pleas for all outsiders to never enter the state, lest they learn the true nature of its power structure. Likewise, there are also signs that the country's heavy fortification is not just enforced to stop people from going in, but also to prevent more wayward citizens from getting out. A similar mindset has been applied by the North Korean government, infamous for calculating ways to make sure not a single person outside the peaks of the state's hierarchy leaves the country,
even if certain foreigners are granted access into limited amounts of the nation.
Like when the Earl allowed a banquet to take place for diplomatic purposes in Too Old. Even if someone does leave the country, the film featured in Lemonhope shows that the Earl can take out his anger on other people he claims were involved in Lemonhope's escape, which bears some similarities to that of North Korea's criminal policy of guilt by association, in which those thought to be closely associated with a defector are also thrown in jail in case they have the same idea. That last one might be kind of stretching it at this point, but when you consider when Lemonhope premiered, as well as the events surrounding a brief but uneasy crisis between the Americans and the North Korean governments during the 9-month production process the episode would have taken from concept to complete work, it's likely the clash between the countries was fresh on the team's mind, and some ideas may slip through during the production process. LSP attacked Finn. Perhaps the most shocking and controversial events in the entire show came during the season's 6th episode Breezy, in which during the lowest pit of Finn's depression, he decides to go out on a journey around Ooo in search of another woman to fill the void in his mind. One of these is Lumpy Space Princess, who was shown to be a bit friendly with Finn in the past, and it seems that this time around, Finn is looking to finally reciprocate her feelings, as they dance together late at night. These activities quickly escalate, and soon enough, the two decide to make out. But LSP wants more, no longer interested in the kiddie pool, and desperate to get into the deep end. One scene transition later, and we see Finn looking shocked, staring into space, and covering himself up. The possible implications that this scene provided sparked an outrage amongst certain circles of fans, though there has long been debate over Finn's role in the event, as he doesn't really appear to protest LSP's deep-end comments. If anything, he goes along with it by saying he's not a good swimmer. Things got so bad that someone on Tumblr had to reach out to the episode's co-writer Jesse Moynihan, who clarified that nothing particularly cruel was meant to be implied in the scene. It can all just be chalked up to a bad sexual experience caused by Finn pushing himself too far down into rock bottom, and here he's just reacting to the realisation of how far he's fallen, like Walter White in the crawl space. Moynihan said that this was based on his own spiritual journey, saying that sometimes you don't realise where you are until you've hit the bottom, but from there you can only go up. After all, he does get his arm back at the end of the episode, so at least one good thing came out of this short sex bender. Finn killed Huntress Wizard. On the other hand, we have an obscure unconfirmed theory that alleges a horrific crime was later committed by Finn, albeit without his knowledge of the consequences. In Fyodor and Cake's second episode, Simon Petrikov, Finn offers Simon to join him on a quest, to free him, however briefly, from the monotony of his life in Upton. Here, the two encounter a wild beast that Finn is quick to slay. However, some are quick to point out that a green complexion, as well as the shape of the mask worn by the bear, could suggest that this beast was actually a transformed version of Huntress Wizard herself. This could explain why Finn previously brought up her advice on not entering the forest they encountered a beast in. If we take this into consideration, then that brief scene in the colour guide to Cheers takes on a different meaning, as it may not have been Huntress Wizard, but rather Finn, mourning his loss after accidentally killing her. These other depictions of her and Prisma the Wishmaster, and even in the promo art to Season 2, may not be a clear enough way out either, as Prisma's vision of her could be another example of a flashback, as she's wearing the original outfit she wore prior to Flute Spell, and this version of Huntress Wizard seen hanging with Fiona and Cake could very well turn out to be another alternate universe version of her, in a classic twist by the writing team. This observation would be an extremely dark interpretation of Finn's post-series character, as it basically undoes all his developments in the latter half of the original show, reverting him back to the reckless and irresponsible adventurer he was in his pre-teens, as a means of coping with the death of his brother Jake, creating a darkly ironic scenario where his own hubris results in him killing the love of his life, whilst he's still none the wiser. There is still the fairly likely possibility that we're looking far too deep into this, and Fincher's bros could still rejoice in seeing the two on screen again come the next season, but it could be important to remember that stranger things have happened before. Finn cells. When discussing the things that Finn went through and the things that he committed in the series, this pejorative phrase started appearing in Adventure Time related co-threads to describe a certain type of person that many in this side of the fandom felt was popping up in the aftermath of the original series. Now, the thing about Co is that it's one of the few boards on 4chan that doesn't really allow general threads for broad topics like certain shows, as moderators see them as meta threads that end up clogging the catalogue. Though there are a few exceptions to this rule. Even major competitions like Miss Co have been interrupted for apparently violating it. This means that whenever Adventure Time is brought up, it usually has to be about a specific topic in the show, and it usually results in threads that fall into one of two categories. Coonbait, starring the iconic duo of lust-provoking image and irrelevant time-wasting question, and Ragebait, usually featuring this gif, captured with something along the lines of, what do they mean by this? This naturally doesn't result in the best discussion coming out of these threads, and the focus on the unresolved conclusions of Finn's love life results in many people dropping this term to describe those they feel are obsessed with the possibility that Finn didn't score, as they projected their own lack of romantic success onto him. Though there are indeed quite a few people who appear to fit into this mould, things seem to have settled a bit since Fiona and Kate pointed towards a relatively happy ending for Finn, if we discount that last theory at least. But there is still a bit of ambiguity hanging over it, and since characters like PB and Marceline were given more concrete conclusions, naturally shit-flinging of a vaguely political variety continues on a fair few occasions, like a lot of post-2016 4chan unfortunately. So whenever I keep showing up to these threads, it ends up feeling a lot like I've got some case of Stockholm Syndrome, and I try to avoid the especially fiery ones, but beyond all the quarrelling and trolling, there is still a tight-knit community of draw friends and right fellas who still make quite a few cool things. If only they didn't have to be restricted to thread number 50,000 about how much Finn suffered. Finn deserves to suffer. Around a few years back in a now deleted tweet, storyboarder Sam Alden would drop a brief anecdote, where he reveals that his father once gave him a bunch of psychiatric literature surrounding topics like atonement and the Oedipus complex, because Sam once said to him that Finn deserved to suffer. Many are taking this to just be a case of his dad overreacting to a writer being a bit dramatic and sadistic, but quite a few Anons on 4chan who could be described as Finn cells use this tweet as concrete proof that the writers in the series held a grudge against Finn, especially since he shared this information whilst in a thread with writers Luke Pearson and Lyle Partridge, suggesting that this kind of chatter at least wasn't too crazy for the team. Sam, however, wouldn't end up boarding an episode of his own until Season 6's The Mountain, around the time Finn was already on the way up, and many of his later episodes like Flute Spell and Happy Warrior would introduce Finn and Huntress Wizard's relationship, and throw in a line suggesting him and Flame Princess could get together again.
Honestly, I could still see those two working out.
Don't think I missed that. And he's retrospectively regarded as one of the best writers in the show's second half, so if he was being legit here,
assuming the screen cap itself is genuine,
then it's probably just more a case of the general atmosphere rubbing off on him, and it all just came out of him at an inopportune time. That's probably a more understandable explanation, seeing how he jumped on board just after a long string of events that started with Finn breaking up with his girlfriend in an episode that just so happened to be co-written by Luke Pearson, where it was written in a way that some viewers and fans regarded as trying too hard to make him look like a knobhead. Then he acts like an even bigger knobhead when he tries to rebound onto Bubblegum in the next episode. Then he gets cucked by the village idiots, gets betrayed by his father, loses his arm, succumbs to a deep depression, and at the very least has a negative sexual encounter with a fat chick. But things seem to be going Finn's way by the time Sam joined the crew, and a lot of his episodes focus on making him grow into the mature figure he becomes by the series' end. Though the screen cap doesn't show when he posted a tweet, if we look at his library of work, maybe it makes sense why he deleted it at least by mid-2016, as he probably didn't agree with the statements anymore, or more likely just thought too many people took it the wrong way. It's just a shame that whenever he's brought up on Adventure Time threads, he's usually just written off as a suffering guy and the scourge of Finn cells everywhere. Just goes to prove the old saying right, whenever you put something online, it's up there forever. Nightmare Time with Finn and Jake. This is the name of a short shock fic, created in the early days of the series, that gained a bit of attention in certain parts of the internet for its graphic content and subject matter. What separated it from a lot of similar fics at the time, like Dipper Goes to Taco Bell or Pearl's Nasty Clam, was that there was no build-up to make you think it was just a regular fanfiction. You just thrown bollock first into freezing cold water, and stay there all the way through. So a bit more like a copy-pasta of anything. Basically in this fic, Jake uses his stretching powers on Finn, until he ends up killing him. I'll let you fill in the gaps yourself. Rebecca Sugar doesn't like Bubbling. When discussing the creation and flourishing of Bubbling, a lot of it is credited towards writer Rebecca Sugar, but there have been some who have argued that maybe her role in developing their relationship may have either been oversold, or she actually didn't have any interest in the pairing to begin with. But that's ridiculous, I hear you protest. Wasn't she the person who wrote what was missing, specifically introducing the concept into the show? And not only that, but wasn't she also the same Rebecca Sugar who went on to create a series featuring a cast comprised almost entirely of gay space rocks? Well, yes, those parts are true, but this one episode was the only real time she brought up the concept in the show, as something that happened in the past. The relationship arguably wasn't kicked into second gear until Skywitch, and that wasn't boarded until after she had already left the team to work on Steven Universe. Besides, she would also write an episode where Finn is saved from the Lich for a sweater made by PB, infused with the power of liking someone a lot, as well as a couple more in which Finn and Marceline develop a closer friendship compared to their more playful dynamic in Season 1. In fact, when you look at some of the earlier sketches she made for the show, you come to notice that, at least at first, she wasn't pairing Marceline with Bubblegum, she was pairing her with Finn. This would be among the many points brought up in the theory suggested by a 4chan user, who you can probably tell was a massive Finn-Celine shipper, who, if you ask me, are probably some of the most dedicated people in the fandom, as almost 15 years after Go With Me came out and said that Finn and Marceline wasn't going to happen, they're still making some incredible fics and fan art, asking, yeah, but what if it was? So, obviously it's a bit biased, but the theory goes something like this. So, when Sugar joined the show, she quickly made Marceline's character development a massive pet project of hers. That much we know is true. She said so herself that she felt connected to Marceline and her experiences ever since she started out. One side to all this that the Anon alleges, though, is that it also allowed for Marceline to be someone who better complemented Finn. It was also around this time that she started drawing attention to the negative aspects of PB, culminating in the episode What Was Missing, where Marceline's song, I'm Just Your Problem, first conceived by Sugar, highlights these flaws clear as day. But this episode was also an opportunity to further develop her character, as by the end, she was able to put their rocky past behind them and forgive Bonnabelle for her past faults. Eventually though, whilst halfway through working on Marceline's character a bit more, Sugar conceded that she couldn't make a proper relationship with Finn and Marceline work, as, in the Anon's words, this ain't Japan. So after a bit of time back in the drawing board, she came up with a new character, Flame Princess, who would serve as Finn's new love interest. Whilst this conveniently left the door open for a relationship between PB and Marceline to happen again in the future, Sugar created FP to feature the traits of both, combining both the regal background of Bubblegum, and most notably the daddy issues and dark backstory of Marceline, effectively making her a way for Sugar to properly explore Finn and Marceline's would-be relationship dynamic, but this time in a more ethical way, since they're the same age and everything. That wouldn't stop her from dropping a couple of hints later on, as in her second last episode as a storyboarder, Bad Little Boy, she presents a scenario in Fiona and Cake's world, introducing Marceline's male counterpart, Marshall Lee, who messes around and flirts with Fiona, Finn's gender-bent self. What's more interesting is that this is part of a fanfiction
created in universe by Marceline herself.
But after Sugar decides to leave the team for greener pastures, unlike her other standout contributions, much of her work towards strengthening the ties between Finn and Marceline, as well as her ways of exploring a romantic relationship for a similar dynamic, were quickly thrown out the window. Finn and Flame Princess broke up just a few episodes after she left, apparently to give FP more of her own identity, but since they didn't really do much with her, it's probably also because Sugar was the only person with a plan behind her character. Finn and Marceline also don't seem to care about each other in the way they did before, as since then they've never really had a proper heart-to-heart. Marceline would end up selling Finn's house to a stranger in Ocarina, and Finn just burps on a dying Marceline in the Stakes episode Take Her Back. Meanwhile, after a sort of redemption arc, Bubblegum is now back with Marceline and all as well, despite Sugar's alleged feelings towards the character. Though a lot of this long and convoluted theory just seems like one massive coat by a rabid shipper to explain how a ship was totally going to work if Sugar had her way, it is kind of interesting to consider that, at least at one point in time,
there was at least a possibility that old Sucrose was what the Anons would call our girl all along.
Finn and Jake reincarnated as Mordecai and Rigby. Now back to some less heavy stuff. Let's talk reincarnation. Following their leap into their next incarnation at the end of Together Again, where do Finn and Jake go next? The obvious answer would probably be somewhere like the constantly overcast realm inhabited by Shermie and Beth. But what if they went even further out in between those time periods? Perhaps their bond as homies for eternity, granting them life in a world where they're able to enjoy brotherly love with each other in a slightly less fantastical setting, a few dimensions down, before returning to their prime timeline later on. We already know that Flapjack is technically canon to the wider multiverse of Adventure Time, and if we also refer to the idea that creators have some kind of domain over the universes of their creation, like how Penn Ward may be Prismo's boss, perhaps the same could be said about the work of fellow Flapjack veteran J.G. Quintel. Perhaps the two worlds of regular show and Adventure Time may not be that far apart, thanks to their shared origin points, and it could be that there was just an especially heavy knife brainstorm in OO once Finn and Jake were sent off by Life into a new, life. Obviously we're operating a lot of hypotheticals and what-ifs in order for this to work, but it is interesting to explore the non-zero possibility that Finn and Jake might have had a detour on their way back to OO. The Fresno Nightcrawler. Amongst the several cryptids rumoured to be roaming the North American wilderness, one of them has been described as possessing a ghostly and perhaps cartoony form. This is a Fresno Nightcrawler, a relatively recent discovery in cryptozoology, first recorded in 2007 by a local of the California town, though there would later be other alleged sightings in Yosemite, Montana, and even as far as Poland. They're described as being pasty white blobs, with narrow slender legs and sometimes two black dots for eyes. Whilst the rarity of their sightings has led many within the cryptid hunting community to regard them as hoaxes, their unusual appearance has also attracted the attention of other communities. Amongst them are Adventure Time fans, as their simplistic appearance and unconventional physiology will match well with the weird and wonderful creatures you might come across around the land of OO. This has led many to draw examples of fan art in various styles, showcasing the oddities of these quirky little creatures. Hopefully they aren't actually magic monsters that were hinted at in the series, as that probably means the Mushroom War might be arising soon, and it could bring about even more dangerous creatures with it. Adventure Time, 1967. Didn't want to leave you on a dark note, so let's just touch on a nice obscure mystery, one that predates the original series pilot by 4 decades. So, with a name as deliberately generic as Adventure Time, it wouldn't be too unlikely for someone to make that combination at some point in the past, and as it turns out, someone did. According to TV listings, the Canadian broadcaster CBC will present another show by the name of Adventure Time during the summers of 1967 and 1968, though we have a few names for episodes like The Secret Tunnel, One Wish Too Many, Eagle Rock and Raiders of the New Forest, due to the show premiering in a time before home recording, as well as a relative lack of lost media coverage in Canada compared to the States. Nothing besides these listings have surfaced online, though based on a bit of cross-referencing and anecdotal evidence from Canadian boomers, it appears that these listings sadly aren't anything special. Most observers believe that this title is just a shorthand for the show Time Out for Adventure, like how Doctor Who was referred to using the title Doctor rather than the full word in the Radio Times. Bit of a difference, but I had to sneak in one more reference somehow. Even then, it's less of a program and more of a programming block, taking a bunch of old British adventure films from the 1940s and 50s, and cutting them into serialised half-hour segments to fill up children's television space during the summer holidays. This theory is also reinforced by how all the episodes share their names with obscure films from around that period, and Time Out for Adventure was also said to be broadcasting around the same time as the scheduled episodes. So, unfortunately, these TV guides probably aren't referring to some psychedelic low-budget fantasy show made by a small team in rural Saskatchewan, but I guess the difference in content between this Adventure Time and the one we're familiar with just goes to show how far the realm of children's entertainment has come in the past half-century. It'll be strange to consider that there might come a day where the show we're familiar with might also look archaic compared to what came after, but for now, as people both young and old continue to appreciate it for the themes it explored, the worlds it presented, and the tales that it told, it seems like our Adventure Time is bound to continue standing the test of, well, time.
Alright then, so let's wrap things up real quick. So to get the elephant in the room out of the way, a lot of this was written and recorded in a pre-soy set world, so naturally some elements about 4chan mentioned here might be a bit outdated. Still, some time off the old honeypot really helped me open up towards other communities. Though you're probably going to end up with less frequent posting and some mild shitblinging, which really just comes with the territory. Alternative image boards like Plus4chan, as well as various Discord groups, all offer much smaller, niche, and arguably stronger communities to get yourself immersed in. So hanging out there at least on occasion would probably be a nice change of pace if you're fed up with Co. Anyway, there are also a few other things on this iceberg that I considered adding, like a theory on how Flame Princess might be half human, or how Oo might be on the British Isles, but they were maybe a bit too difficult to prove or explain, or maybe just because I thought them up a bit too late in, and already had 95 other entries to juggle by then. I could try a short follow-up for any extra suggestions, but it took me a hell of a long time to get this sorted, so I guess a short break from the Land of Oo might be in order. As for anything else on this channel, there isn't really too much planned. I'm still on and off about that gaming history series I mentioned in the last Iceberg, and I would like to try live streaming to go through my massive backlog of games, though I'm not too sure on where to go next. To be honest, I just sort of post here whenever I feel like it, and figure now would be a good time to post this. But it would be nice to do some more with this channel sometime soon. If my stuff here took your fancy and you want something more concrete, then I've got a website that I plan on updating as soon as I'm finished with this video. One of those updates includes a news section about a webcomic I'm developing and hope to start work on in the not too distant future. You can find some details for it on my DeviantArt, both of which I'll also link down in the description. But besides all that, once again I'd like to thank Pen & Hex Studios and Invincible Elliot for making the original Iceberg, and of course I'd like to thank you all for sticking all the way through to the rambling session at the end. I really hope you enjoyed watching or listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it, and I hope you have yourself a very nice rest of your day.